It started with laughter. The kind that spreads like wildfire through a classroom, sharp, unkind, and far too loud for 8:03 a.m. on a Tuesday. Jaden Carter stood at the front of the room, still gripping the mechanical pencil he'd carried since freshman year, its silver paint chipped and faded. All eyes were on him. Some narrowed in disbelief, others wide with mockery. "Yo, no way he's serious," someone snickered from the back row. "Jaden?" "The advanced placement test," another chimed in, voice dripping with sarcasm. Even Mr. Whitaker looked mildly amused, arms crossed over his old corduroy blazer, eyebrows raised with that familiar mix of skepticism and subtle disdain. Jaden didn't flinch. He'd walked through worse halls than this one. He'd heard worse than laughter. And numbers were silent. They didn't mock you. They either added up or they didn't. That was something he could trust. Still, the sting of the room's reaction clung to his skin like static. "I'd like to take the AP Calculus placement test," he repeated, voice even. Whitaker leaned back against his desk, tapping a pen on the surface like a metronome of doubt. "Jaden, this isn't a regular quiz. It's for students who are already in the top percentile. Students who've, let's just say, been preparing for this for a while." There it was. The polite version of "you don't belong here." Jaden looked the teacher straight in the eyes. "I've been preparing too." Whitaker hesitated for a moment longer before sighing and pulling open a drawer. He slid a thick, stapled packet across the desk toward Jaden. The cover sheet read, "Advanced Placement Mathematics Evaluation, Placement Only, 90 minutes. You've got until the bell," Whitaker said. "Surprise me, Mr. Carter." As Jaden walked back to his desk, his usual seat by the window, third row from the back, the laughter had mostly died down, replaced by whispers and side eyes. He didn't look at anyone. He sat, flipped to the first question, and began. His heart was beating fast, not from fear, but focus. It always did this when he solved. The rhythm was something he'd trained himself to listen to. Like music. The first question was a limit. Basic stuff. He didn't even need paper, just ran the logic through in his head, scribbled down the answer with notes for work. Second problem, rate of change. Third, an integral nested within a curve problem. He smiled slightly. This was his language. Elsewhere in the classroom, Marcus leaned over to Talia and whispered, "Dude's gonna crash and burn. Mr. Whitaker's gonna eat him alive when he flunks." Talia didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed on Jaden, on the way he didn't stop, didn't hesitate, just kept moving from one question to the next like he was solving a riddle he already knew the answer to. Her father was a math teacher across town, and she'd seen that look before, on someone who knew. Jaden wasn't guessing. Time passed. Every tick of the clock sounded like a drumbeat in the silence. Even Whitaker noticed. He glanced up more than once, surprised Jaden hadn't paused to ask questions or stall on any page. No sighs. No confused muttering. Just, solving. When the bell rang, Jaden stood. Calmly, confidently. He walked to the front of the room and handed in the packet. Mr. Whitaker took it without a word. Their eyes met briefly. Jaden offered a nod, then turned to leave. "Carter," Whitaker said suddenly, stopping him halfway through the door. Jaden turned. "Yes, sir." Whitaker glanced down at the packet, flipping through a few pages at random. He lingered on one problem. His jaw tensed, then relaxed. "Go to your next class," he said, voice unreadable. Jaden didn't smile. Didn't celebrate. He just walked out, his shoulders squared and silent as ever. That night, Mr. Whitaker stayed late in his classroom, the fluorescent lights buzzing above like they always did when the halls were empty. The janitor gave him a nod as he passed by, and Whitaker raised a hand in return, eyes never leaving the test paper in front of him. Page after page, Jaden's answers were clean. Elegant. There were shortcuts even he hadn't considered, proofs rewritten with clarity, logic that flowed like water. By problem 22, Whitaker set his pen down. Jayden hadn't missed a single question. Not one. For a moment, he sat still. The silence of the room wrapped around him, and all he could hear was the echo of his own voice earlier that day. "Surprise me, Mr. Carter." Well. He had. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Before the laughter, before the whispers, and long before the test, Jayden Carter was just a name that most teachers skimmed over during roll call. Not because he caused trouble. Not because he talked too much or too little. But because Jayden had mastered the art of invisibility. You wouldn't notice him in the hallway, dark hoodie, headphones around his neck, eyes scanning the floor tiles like he was solving something underfoot. You'd never guess that he could multiply 5-digit numbers in his head or that he used to fall asleep reading Euclid under the covers. Jayden Carter was 17 years old. Junior year. GPA, 3.97. Attendance, perfect. Friends? Hard to define. He lived on the south side of town in a one-bedroom apartment with his mom, Latrice. Their place wasn't much, but it was clean. Everything had a place. Every corner told a story, a cracked window Jayden had taped over with clear plastic, the bookshelf made from milk crates, filled with math books from garage sales and free library bins, the framed photo of Latrice in her nurse uniform, smiling, though Jayden knew that smile was held together with invisible tape. They'd been on their own since he was 5. His father, Darius, left one night after a fight Jayden could barely remember but never forgot. Something about needing space and not being ready. The only clear image Jayden had of him was a pair of boots by the door, and how they were gone when he woke up. That, and the way his mother never said a bad word about the man. He just couldn't stay, she told him once. But that doesn't mean you can't go far. And Jayden believed her. Still did. He fell in love with math the same year his dad left. It started with a set of dice. He used to roll them over and over, trying to figure out the odds of getting 2 6s. He didn't know the word probability yet, but he loved the pattern. Loved that it made sense. By the time he hit middle school, he was staying after class to talk to his math teacher about why division by 0 wasn't allowed. Because it breaks the rules, the teacher had said. But who made the rules? Jayden asked. His teacher laughed. Mathematicians. And nature. Jayden had nodded like he understood, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. It wasn't just rules. It was truth. Numbers didn't care what zip code you came from, or what your skin looked like, or if you had one parent or two. Numbers were fair. And in Jayden's world, fair was rare. At school, he kept his head down. Not out of fear, but out of calculation. He knew how people saw him. He could hear the coded language teachers used when they talked about him. Bright kid, but quiet. Smart, but could apply himself more. He has potential if he just stayed focused. They didn't know he was already focused. Focused like a scalpel. But it was easier to let them think what they wanted. Expectations were weapons. The lower they were, the less they could hurt. At home, Latrice worked night shifts at a nursing home. She always left a note for Jayden when she headed out, something scribbled in cursive on the back of a receipt or paper towel. Remember who you are. They don't have to believe in you, just you. Make today worth it, baby. Sometimes she'd leave $10 in quarters. Just in case. Jayden never used them. He kept them in a jar. He had one real friend, Talia Mendoza. She lived 2 blocks over. They'd met in freshman year when she caught him solving Rubik's cubes during lunch. You know that's not normal, right? She asked. I'm not trying to be normal. She liked that answer. From then on, they shared lunches, swapped playlists, argued about which number was the loneliest. Jaden said 0. Talia said 1. Jaden made a good case, but she held her ground. Talia was bold, sarcastic, and wicked smart in her own way, more into poetry than math. But she understood Jaden in a way no one else really did. She didn't laugh when he went off about Fibonacci spirals in nature or the logic behind Pascal's triangle. She listened. More importantly, she believed in him. Mr. Whitaker. That was a different story. Jaden had Whitaker for geometry last year. It was complicated. Whitaker was old school, chalk and talk, no shortcuts, no calculators. He called Jaden son in a way that made Jaden's jaw clench. Like a reminder. Like a warning. He graded hard. Rarely gave A's. And something in his eyes always looked like it was measuring you for size, not just academically, but as a person. Jaden didn't mind the pressure. What got to him was the doubt. Once, after Jaden aced a surprise quiz, Whitaker looked at him for a long second and said, "Nice job, Carter." "Who helped you?" Jaden didn't answer. Didn't have to. So why take the AP placement test? Why now? Because Jaden was tired. Not tired of math. Tired of hiding. Tired of pretending like being smart was something he had to apologize for. Tired of shrinking to fit the mold other people saw for him. Tired of knowing he was capable of more, and watching others assume he wasn't. Taking that test wasn't about a class. It was a challenge. A declaration. He didn't need permission to be great. He just needed the chance to prove it. The night before the test, Jaden sat by the window in the apartment, solving problems from an old AP prep book he'd found in a donation box at the library. Outside, police sirens echoed in the distance, and someone was yelling on the street below. But inside, there was only calm. Jaden scribbled out equations by the dim light of the desk lamp. Beside him, a bowl of cereal had gone soggy. He didn't care. Latrice passed by in her scrubs, dropping a kiss on his forehead. "You got this, baby," she whispered. Jaden looked up at her, then back at the page. "I know." Mr. Whitaker didn't always have walls around him. There was a time, maybe 15 years ago, when he was the kind of teacher students stayed after class to talk to. The kind who turned chalkboards into canvases, who threw math club pizza parties and made jokes about imaginary numbers like they were actual stand-up material. But somewhere between the third divorce, the budget cuts, and the changing faces of his classroom, something inside Mr. Whitaker hardened. Like mortar filling cracks. Slowly. Quietly. Until one day, he wasn't the teacher who inspired, he was the one students tolerated. Now, every morning began the same. Coffee. Desk. Grading stack. Routine as a heartbeat. Controlled. Predictable. Just how he liked it. Mr. Whitaker wasn't a cruel man. Not intentionally. He believed in discipline. In fairness. In earning respect, not handing it out like candy on Halloween. And if that made him seem cold, so be it. His students didn't know his story. They didn't know about his son, Ethan, who used to sit at the kitchen table drawing maps of imaginary kingdoms, until one day he decided he wanted to go live in one, and never came back. They didn't know about the university job he'd been offered in Seattle, the one he turned down because his wife at the time said she'd rather rot in Georgia than move for some numbers. They didn't know that when he looked at kids like Jaden Carter, something twisted deep in his chest, not hate, not fear, maybe just memory. The memory of what it felt like to believe in someone, and how easy it was to be wrong. He'd seen Jaden before, of course. The kid had a quiet confidence he didn't trust. Kept to himself. Didn't raise his hand unless he was sure. Smart. Sure. Whitaker could admit that. But the school was full of smart. What he didn't like was how Jayden carried it, not with arrogance, but like a secret he refused to share. Like he was waiting for someone to underestimate him. And that always made Whitaker bristle. Because students like Jayden, especially the quiet ones, came with baggage. Either they were brilliant but lazy, or brilliant but angry, or brilliant and always a step away from blowing it all up just to prove a point. He'd seen the pattern too many times. Talent, then trouble. So when Jayden asked to take the AP placement test, Whitaker didn't even blink before assuming the worst. He's not ready. He's trying to prove something. He's gonna crash and burn. What Whitaker hadn't expected, what he refused to believe, was that Jayden might not be the exception to the rule. He might be a whole different equation. That day in class, as Jayden began the test, Whitaker did what he always did when he didn't want to deal with hope. He buried himself in the moment. Erased the grin creeping onto a few students' faces. Called out a warning about cheating even though he didn't think Jayden would. But still, he watched. Not because he wanted to catch him fail. But because something about the way Jayden worked, the focus, the speed, the way his hand moved confidently from problem to problem, nagged at Whitaker. It reminded him of someone. It reminded him of himself. Back in his own high school days, Whitaker was the Jayden of his class. Poor family. Long bus rides. Nothing but books to pass the time. He remembered solving calculus problems under the flicker of a kitchen light while his dad argued with the landlord over rent. But he also remembered how the world treated him differently. He remembered being praised. He remembered expectations. Jayden. All Whitaker saw was resistance. Not from Jayden himself, but from the system. The way the other teachers talked about him. The way counselors lowered their voices when discussing kids from that side of town. And Whitaker hated to admit it, but a part of him had learned to agree. It was easier to assume the worst than risk being disappointed. Easier to stay behind the wall. That evening, after the last bell rang and the classroom emptied, Whitaker stayed behind. He told himself he was just cleaning up. Reorganizing. But he knew the truth, he wanted to see the test. He sat down at his desk and flipped open the packet. Page 1. Correct. Clean. Logical. Page 2. Still perfect. Shortcuts he hadn't taught in class. Solutions with flair. Page 5. No missed steps. No sloppy mistakes. By page 12, Whitaker leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed, test held loosely in his hand. This wasn't just a good performance. This was mastery. And it wasn't the kind you could fake. No one cheats this well. But instead of joy, or pride, or even surprise, what Whitaker felt was discomfort. Because now, he had to reconcile two truths. 1, Jayden Carter had outperformed his best students, and possibly, him. 2, and he hadn't seen it coming. Not even close. He'd judged the kid by his hoodie. By his silence. By the side of town he lived on. And now? Now he was faced with a simple, undeniable equation. Bias plus blind spot equals failure. His. Not Jayden's. He stared at the test long after the sun dipped below the parking lot, casting long, dusty rays through the blinds. A thought came, uninvited. What if I've been doing this all wrong? But before he could unpack that question, the familiar voice inside, the voice he'd trained over years of disappointment and guarded teaching, kicked back in. Maybe it's a fluke. Maybe he got lucky. Maybe I'll test him again, under supervision. The wall built itself back up, brick by brick. And by the time Whitaker shut off the lights and left the classroom, the test was back in his briefcase, neatly tucked between lesson plans and discipline reports. But the weight of it stayed in his mind. A perfect score. From the kid he didn't believe in. Talia Mendoza didn't talk much at school, at least not to most people. She was the kind of girl who always had earbuds dangling around her neck, a sketchbook peeking out of her bag, and a resting face that scared off small talk. People called her quiet or weird or artsy in the same way someone might say, "Oh, that chair's broken." Like it was an inconvenience, not a choice. But Jayden? Jayden, she understood. They didn't talk every day. They didn't sit together in every class. But there was a thread between them, silent, strong, unspoken. They were the kind of friends who didn't need filler conversation. "No, what did you get on the test?" or "Did you hear about so-and-so?" Just presence. Just knowing. Their friendship started freshman year. Jayden had been sitting alone in the library during lunch, solving a Sudoku puzzle printed off the school's slow old desktop. Talia passed by on her way to the graphic novels and paused. "You're using a pen," she said flatly. Jayden looked up, confused. "Yeah. So?" Talia raised an eyebrow. "That's bold." He cracked a small smile. "Only if I plan on making mistakes." She didn't smile back. But she sat across from him anyway. From that day on, lunch was theirs. Talia never asked Jayden about his life unless she knew he wanted to talk. And Jayden never asked why Talia wore long sleeves in 90-degree heat or why her phone screen was cracked and taped together with a sticker that read, "Don't look back." They just existed next to each other. Quiet. Steady. And sometimes that was all a person needed. That week, after Jayden took the AP test, the silence between them wasn't quite the same. It wasn't tense. Just different. Like the air had shifted and neither of them knew whether to speak on it or let it drift. "So," Talia said, stabbing her fork into a sad excuse for cafeteria salad, "you took the test." Jayden nodded. And what?" She glanced at him. "You either crushed it, or you died trying." Jayden didn't answer. But the corner of his mouth twitched. That was enough for her. Later that day, she caught him alone in the library again. He was flipping through an old math competition book, highlighter in hand, headphones on. She dropped her bag in the seat beside him and slid in like it was her right. "You didn't tell me he accused you." Jayden didn't respond at first. He kept highlighting. Page after page. Finally, he spoke, voice low. He didn't say it directly. But he didn't have to. Talia leaned back in her chair. "Figures. Whitaker treats half the school like they're idiots. Treats the other half like they owe him something." Jayden closed the book, exhaled. "I don't even care," he said. Talia looked at him sideways. "That's a lie." Jayden paused. Then shrugged. "Okay. Maybe I care a little." It wasn't the accusation that stung. Not really. Jayden was used to people questioning him. The part that dug deep was that even when he tried to play by the rules, even when he asked, prepared, tested himself, it still wasn't enough. He still wasn't the right kind of smart. Still had to prove he wasn't cheating instead of being recognized for doing something exceptional. Talia saw it in his eyes, the way his jaw clenched just slightly when he spoke. She didn't know how to fix it. But she knew how to stand next to him. And sometimes, that was more important than a solution. "You know you scared the hell out of him, right?" she said. Jayden looked over. "Who?" "Whitaker. That man looked like someone just told him the moon's made of Skittles." Jayden chuckled, his first real laugh in days. "I'm serious," Talia continued. "You walked in, broke his little grading system, and made him question his whole teaching career. You're a math revolution, Jay." Jayden rolled his eyes. "Stop. I will not." She leaned in, whispering dramatically. "We shall call this the Carter Theorem." He snorted. "That's the worst name I've ever heard." Talia smirked. "Okay, fine. But when you're famous and solving world hunger with geometry, I expect a credit line. Shout out to Talia Mendoza for not letting me drown in self-doubt. Jaden didn't say anything. But he looked at her with something softer than usual. It wasn't thanks. It was understanding. That afternoon, something shifted between them again. Not in a romantic way, not yet, not clearly. But in a we've been through fire together kind of way. Jaden started opening up more. Just a little. Small things. Like how his mom worked double shifts and used to fall asleep sitting up in their only chair. How he stayed up late because silence helped him think better. How math felt like a place no one could touch him. And Talia told him about her older brother who used to protect her until one day he couldn't. About how drawing helped her put things back together. About how people assumed she was angry because she didn't smile enough. They were both quiet for different reasons. They both used silence as armor. And now, they were learning to share that space. As they left the library, Talia nudged him. "What are you gonna do if you get into the AP class?" Jaden shrugged. "Guess I'll show up and blow their minds." She smiled. "That's the spirit." He glanced at her, teasing. "You still think zero's lonelier than one?" Talia stopped, mock offended. "Absolutely. Zero means nothing. One at least has itself." Jaden thought for a second. "But zero can become anything. That's kind of powerful." She tilted her head, considering. "Or it's a void waiting to suck the world in." He grinned. "Math is dramatic." She grinned back. "So are we." The laughter came back before the results did. It echoed in whispers down the hallway, behind locker doors, between class periods. Like the whole school had picked up a rumor and passed it around like gum wrappers. "Yo, did you hear? Jaden Carter tried to test into AP Calculus." "No way. For real?" He deadass sat there like he was Einstein or some sh*t. And then always. Laughter. Not mean, exactly. Just, casual. Dismissive. The kind of laugh people use when something doesn't fit their version of the world, so instead of adjusting the world, they joke about it. It got to Jaden. He wished it didn't, but it did. Because it wasn't the kind of laugh that said, "He's funny." It was the kind that said, "He's a joke." By Wednesday, it wasn't just whispers anymore. Someone taped a fake flyer to Jaden's locker that read, "New math genius on campus, free tutoring from the guy who thinks he's better than you." Someone else changed their group chat name to Carter's Calculators and spammed it with memes of confused math ladies and graphs crashing into flames. Even some teachers were in on it, not in any obvious way, but with the way they raised their eyebrows at Jaden like, "You? Really?" And then there was Marcus. Always Marcus. He'd been waiting for this. "Dude," Marcus said one morning, leaning against a locker with his usual smirk, "you really thought you were gonna slide into Whitaker's AP class like that? Man, I've been in honors since 6th grade and I barely passed that test." Jaden didn't respond. "Bet he gave you a sympathy packet," Marcus added. "You know, affirmative action math." A few people laughed. Jaden didn't. Not because he didn't have a comeback, but because if he opened his mouth, he might say something he couldn't take back. At lunch, he sat alone. Even Talia was late that day, called into a meeting with the art teacher about submitting to some competition. Jaden didn't mind. He was used to eating alone. But this time, the silence felt heavier. He picked at a sandwich he didn't want and stared at the table, his mind racing with equations he didn't need to solve. What if the test never comes back? What if Whitaker loses it? What if they all keep laughing, and he never gets the chance to shut them up? He hated that it mattered. But it did. That afternoon, during third period, the laughter reached a new peak. Whitaker walked into class 5 minutes late. Everyone noticed. Mr. Whitaker was never late. And when he entered, he carried a folder under his arm, the kind he usually reserved for major announcements. He didn't speak right away. Just walked to his desk, set the folder down, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Before we begin," he said, voice measured, "I have something to address." The room shifted instantly. Students sat up straighter. A few glanced around. Marcus leaned back in his chair with a smug grin, like he knew what was coming. Jayden sat perfectly still. Whitaker lifted the paper. "This," he said, "is the official score report for the Advanced Placement Calculus Placement Evaluation." Silence. He looked directly at Jayden. Then back to the class. "One student asked to take the test outside the official schedule," Whitaker continued. "A student many of you, judging by the hallway noise, did not expect to succeed." He held up the page and let it hang in the air like a challenge. "Not only did that student pass," he said, "he scored higher than any other applicant this year." Gasps. No one said a word. Not even Marcus. Whitaker turned toward Jayden, eyes not cold, not warm, just respectful. "Congratulations, Mr. Carter. You've earned your place." The laughter. Dead. Gone. Buried in the weight of fact. Jayden didn't smile. Didn't speak. He just met Whitaker's gaze and gave a single nod. One movement. Like a punctuation mark. The quiet kind that ends an argument. After class, the energy in the hallway was completely different. No jokes. No fake flyers. No snickers behind his back. People moved out of Jayden's way, not like they were scared, but like they didn't quite know what to do with him anymore. Like the rules had changed, and no one had gotten the new playbook yet. Even Marcus looked thrown off. He caught up to Jayden by the stairwell. "Yo, hey," he started. Jayden didn't slow down. "You ain't gonna say nothing?" Jayden stopped. Looked at him for a long second. Then said, evenly, "I don't need to." And he walked away. Later that day, Talia found him by the benches near the side of the gym, the spot they went to when the cafeteria felt too loud. She dropped her bag beside his. "No one's laughing now," she said. Jayden shrugged. "It won't last." She looked at him. "You mad it happened?" He shook his head. "Nah. Just wish they knew I've been this smart. Not just today." Talia leaned back, face turned toward the cloudy sky. "They don't need to know," she said. "They just need to watch." Jayden smiled, finally, fully. "Maybe I'll let M." That night, Jayden came home to find a note from his mom on the counter. Scrawled on a napkin, next to a slice of leftover cake. "Heard you passed that test. I already knew you would. But it's nice when the rest of the world catches up. Proud of you. Mom." He stood there for a long time, staring at the napkin. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his backpack, next to the test results, the old Rubik's Cube, and a future that suddenly felt a little closer. The room smelled like dry erase markers, cheap coffee, and nervous ambition. Jayden Carter stood in the doorway of room 318, the AP Calculus class, and for a split second, everything he had fought for suddenly felt real. The kind of real that hits your chest before your brain. Like stepping onto a stage you didn't know had this many eyes on it. Because they were all looking at him. Not directly. Not obviously. But sideways. Over shoulders. Through half-glances and fake conversations. He felt it. The new kid. The outsider. The kid from that side of town. Mr. Becker, the AP Calculus teacher, was already at the board, scribbling a warm-up problem that looked like a small explosion of Greek symbols and integrals. He turned, noticed Jayden, and gave a short nod. "You must be Carter." Jayden nodded. "Yes, sir. Grab a seat. We're just getting started. No welcome speech. No mention of the score. Just sit down. Jayden was fine with that. He preferred it that way. The only open seat was near the back, next to a girl with red hair and a graphing calculator that looked like it had been to war. She barely glanced at him as he slid into the chair. Her notebook was already full of scribbles and annotations. The desk in front of him had a cracked corner. The one to his left still had a sticky label on it that read property of Blake W., hands off. Jayden took out his pencil, a single spiral notebook, and nothing else. His entire brain was already humming. Becker didn't teach like Whitaker. He moved fast. Really fast. Today we're jumping into differential equations. Not baby ones, real ones. Think, population growth. Radioactive decay. What's happening as things change in real time? He started throwing problems on the board that didn't come with multiple choice. Jayden's hands itched to solve them. But this wasn't like the practice books or the solitary nights at his desk at home. This was live fire. Timed. Observed. And worst of all, competitive. Because that's what this class was. Everyone in the room had been trained to win. They raised hands before Becker even finished the question. They flexed vocabulary like it was muscle. They answered with speed, not thought. Jayden knew their type. Prepped. Coached. Confident. People who had tutors since 6th grade. People whose parents emailed teachers before midterms. People who didn't question if they belonged here. By the second problem, Jayden already felt behind. By the third, he caught up. By the fifth, he was faster. Not louder. Not showy. But precise. He solved in his notebook while others debated formulas aloud. He double-checked answers while they quoted shortcuts. And when Becker finally turned to the class and asked, "Can anyone explain why this method breaks down at 0, the room went quiet for a half second, then Jayden raised his hand. It was the first time. Not high. Not eager. Just steady. Becker nodded. Jayden cleared his throat. Because at 0, the function isn't defined, it creates a discontinuity. So any method that assumes continuous change breaks. Becker blinked. Then he smiled, just a flicker. Exactly. The class turned to look at him. Again. But this time, the look was different. After class, Jayden packed up quickly. He could feel the silence behind him, less cruel, more curious. Like people were recalculating where he fit on the social graph of the class. As he zipped his bag, the red-haired girl next to him spoke. "You're Jayden, right?" He turned. "Yeah. You're the one who broke Whitaker's record." Jayden paused. "I didn't know there was a record." She smirked. "There is now." Then she stuck out a hand. "I'm Riley." He shook it. "Nice to meet you." She leaned in slightly. "You made Marcus look stupid in third period last week." Jayden raised an eyebrow. "Didn't mean to." "Doesn't matter," Riley said. It was beautiful. Outside the classroom, Talia was waiting, leaned against a locker, arms crossed like she owned the entire hallway. Jayden walked up. She didn't say anything at first. Then, so. He shrugged. Fast-paced. Competitive. A little loud. She nodded. "And? I like it." Talia smiled. "Told you." They started walking down the hall, shoulders brushing. "You think you're gonna fit in?" she asked. Jayden considered that. "No," he said. "I think I'm going to change it." Talia gave a low whistle. "Okay, Carter." Big math energy. Jayden smiled to himself. Not a big one. Just enough. That night, he sat at his desk at home, flipping through the same prep book he used to study for the test. But now, the pages felt smaller. Less intimidating. Latrice peeked into the room, still in her scrubs. "You good?" she asked. Jayden nodded. "Yeah. You don't look stressed." "I'm not." She smiled. "New class going okay?" Jayden looked at her, then at the open notebook. "It's going to be mine," he said. The air felt different in the school hallways now. It was as if Jayden was walking through a space that had been built around expectations he no longer fit into. The whispers, the stares, the sideways glances, they weren't gone, not entirely, but they were changing. They were becoming more careful. Like people weren't sure whether to continue laughing at him, or start respecting him. But Jayden wasn't sure he cared about that. What bothered him now was the new kind of attention he was getting. It was Tuesday morning, and Jayden was walking toward the math wing when Marcus stepped out from around the corner. "Yo," Marcus called out, the same smug grin from last week still on his face, though a little more strained now. "You ready for the next one? Becker's giving us a real challenge today." Jayden stopped. "I'm always ready." Marcus leaned in. "You sure about that, Carter? I mean, some people are born for calculus. Others, they're just happy to watch from the bleachers." Jayden didn't flinch. "Why don't you let me know how the view is from the top of the class when the bell rings?" Jayden said, his voice calm but cutting. Marcus' grin faltered for a second before he recovered, his posture straightening. "Don't think this is over," he muttered, walking off without another word. Jayden watched him go, unfazed. The old Jayden might have felt anger rising in his chest. But the new Jayden? He didn't have time for petty rivalry anymore. The next class was a whirlwind of numbers and symbols. But this time, Jayden wasn't just another student in the back of the room. His mind was moving a step ahead. He understood the material. And when Becker threw a complex derivative problem on the board, Jayden was the first to solve it, his hand raised before anyone else had even processed the question. Becker's eyes found Jayden's. "Carter," he said, nodding, "care to walk us through it?" Jayden stood, not hesitating. He walked to the board and began explaining the solution, each step flowing effortlessly from his mind. His voice was clear, confident. And for the first time, he wasn't just solving math problems, he was taking control of the room. When he finished, there was a beat of silence. Then, Becker gave him a slight, approving nod. "Well done." The class seemed to shift. Eyes that once watched him with doubt now looked at him with curiosity, and maybe even respect. But there were still the quiet ones, the ones who didn't say much but made their judgments known with just a glance. Later that day, Jayden was sitting by himself in the courtyard, trying to focus on his textbook. But the moment Marcus walked by with his friends, he could feel their eyes on him. The whispers followed. "Yo, who does he think he is?" Marcus said, loud enough for Jayden to hear. "Carter's got this little ego trip going on, acting like he's some kind of genius." Jayden didn't respond. He didn't even look up. He just kept reading, letting the words and numbers fill his mind instead of the noise around him. Talia found him during lunch, sitting at their usual spot by the side of the school. She dropped her bag next to him and sat down without saying anything. Jayden didn't need to explain. She could see it on his face, the tension, the subtle pressure of the expectations that were slowly building around him. "Does it feel weird?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let the question sink in, feeling the weight of the attention, the looks, the comments. They weren't loud, but they were persistent, like small stones being thrown into a pond. "Yeah," he said finally. "It's like, no one knows whether to keep pushing me down or start lifting me up. It's confusing." Talia nodded, thoughtful. People hate things they don't understand. And they especially hate when they can't control it. Jayden looked at her. You think I'm just another thing to them? Talia smiled, her eyes a little softer than usual. No. I think you're something they've never had to deal with before. The following week, Jaden walked into his AP calculus class, ready for another day. But as soon as he sat down, Riley, the red-haired girl, leaned over and whispered, "So. I heard Marcus is starting a bet about who'll outscore who in the next quiz. You in?" Jaden didn't have to think twice. "I don't do bets." She raised an eyebrow. "What, you think you're too good for that?" "No," Jaden said, his voice level. "I don't need to prove anything to anyone. Just to myself." Riley smirked. "Fair enough. But don't say I didn't warn you when Marcus starts going for your head." Jaden simply shrugged. Let Marcus do his worst. As the days went on, the tension in the classroom continued to build. Marcus, still on the offensive, would make small, pointed comments in class, always trying to undermine Jaden. His group of friends made snide remarks from across the room, their voices just loud enough for Jaden to catch. But Jaden didn't bite. He didn't rise to their bait. Instead, he kept his focus on the work. When Becker handed out the first major quiz, Jaden made sure to complete every single question with careful precision. A week later, when the results were posted, the class crowded around the bulletin board, all eyes on the grades. Jaden's name was at the top. Not just the highest grade, but a perfect score. The whispering in the classroom intensified, but this time, it wasn't the usual ridicule. It was uncertainty. Doubt. Surprise. And for the first time, the people who had laughed at him, underestimated him, were looking at him, like they didn't know if they should challenge him or follow his lead. Talia found him later that day, after the class had let out. Her eyes gleamed with something between admiration and amusement. "You did it," she said. Jaden nodded, not allowing himself to smile too much. "Guess I did. I think you've officially shaken up their little world," she added, glancing at the kid still hanging around the hallway, whispering and pointing. "I think you're right," Jaden said, his voice quiet but steady. "And it's about time." The next few days were a whirlwind of whispered conversations and sideways glances. But instead of backing down, Jaden stood taller with each passing moment. The tension in the air was almost palpable. Marcus, in particular, wasn't going to let this go easily. It was Wednesday morning when Marcus finally made his move. Jaden had just walked into AP Calculus and was getting settled in his usual seat when Marcus, flanked by his usual entourage, sauntered over. "You know," Marcus said casually, his voice a little louder than necessary, "there are some people around here who think they can just waltz into advanced classes and break all the rules, like they're some kind of prodigy." Jaden didn't even look up. He focused on his notebook, pretending to write, though the words on the page were a blur. "But we all know that doesn't last, right?" Marcus continued, leaning casually against the desk. His friends snickered behind him. Jaden finally glanced up, meeting Marcus's eyes. "You still mad about the quiz, Marcus?" "Mad?" Marcus scoffed. "No, I'm just saying, this isn't some game. You want to play in the big leagues, you need to show you can keep up, not just beat everyone." Jaden tilted his head, his expression neutral. "I'm keeping up just fine." Marcus smirked, then glanced at the rest of the class. The other students were watching now, some curious, others eager for the inevitable clash. "I hope so," Marcus said, his voice suddenly dropping to a low, almost mocking tone. "Because there's a big difference between scoring high on a test and actually knowing what you're doing. But hey, I guess we'll see, won't we?" Jaden stood up, feeling a quiet surge of determination. He wasn't going to be baited into an argument. Instead, he replied calmly, his voice carrying just enough weight to make the room fall silent. "I know exactly what I'm doing, Marcus," he said. "And if you're still unsure, I guess you'll just have to wait and see what happens next." The bell rang, and Marcus turned away with a fake grin, his friends trailing behind him. Jayden sat back down, but the air in the room had changed again. This time, there was a subtle respect, mixed with a little fear. It wasn't just the perfect test score anymore. Jayden was proving that he didn't need to play by anyone's rules but his own. The rest of the lesson passed in a blur. Becker continued his rapid-fire lecture on integrals, but Jayden was lost in his thoughts. He had managed to shut down Marcus, at least for the time being, but he knew this wasn't over. Marcus wasn't the type to back off easily, especially not when he was determined to prove that he was better than Jayden. Lunchtime rolled around, and Jayden was once again sitting alone at their usual spot. Talia joined him a few minutes later, dropping her tray on the table and sitting down with a sigh. "You looked like you had everything under control in class," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Marcus isn't going to take that quietly." Jayden shrugged, his eyes still focused on his textbook. "I don't need him to like me. I just need to show that I can do this." "Which you're doing," she said, nodding approvingly. "But you know it's not just about the math, right?" Jayden looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Talia continued, leaning forward, "it's not just about getting the highest score. It's about fitting in. About proving you can belong." Jayden hesitated. "I don't care about that. I just care about the math." "I get that," she said, glancing around the cafeteria, where the chatter was louder than usual. "But when people start noticing you, really noticing you, it's not just about the numbers. It's about the whole picture. And right now, Marcus is getting a little too comfortable with the idea that he can make your life harder." Jayden knew she was right. It wasn't just about the grades anymore. It was about the social minefield that was high school, and Marcus had been dropping bombs on his reputation ever since the test. Later that afternoon, Jayden was at his locker when Marcus approached him once again. This time, there was no crowd behind him, just the two of them face to face. "Look," Marcus said, his tone softer, more measured than usual, "I get it. You're good at math. But you don't need to make everyone else feel like they're not. That's what you're doing, right? Making all of us feel like we're just average." Jayden met his gaze. "I'm not making anyone feel anything, Marcus. I'm just doing my work. If that bothers you, then maybe you should be focusing more on your own grades instead of worrying about mine." Marcus scoffed. "You think I don't know what you're doing? You're trying to take my spot. You think because you got lucky with one test, you're gonna get everything you want." Jayden's face hardened. "I didn't get lucky. I worked for it. Maybe you should try that next time." The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Marcus didn't say anything more. He just turned, walking away with his shoulders stiff. But Jayden felt a small, quiet victory in his chest. It wasn't just about the math anymore. It was about standing his ground. About showing that he wasn't going to let anyone push him around. That night, as Jayden sat at his desk, solving problems from his calculus workbook, he found himself thinking back on the conversation. Marcus wasn't the only one feeling the pressure. Jayden could sense that there were others, too, people who had quietly underestimated him, who didn't want to admit that the quiet kid from the wrong side of town was rising to the top of the class. It didn't matter. Jayden had always believed that the real battles weren't fought in the classroom or on the field, they were fought inside. And right now, he was winning his. The next day in class, Becker announced that the next quiz would be a challenge, one that would test the students' ability to think on their feet, to solve problems in real time without relying on calculators or notes. Jayden's heart raced with excitement. This was what he had been preparing for. This was the real test. As the class filed out, Marcus gave him one last look. A look that, for the first time, held a hint of doubt. And for the first time, Jayden felt a surge of confidence that wasn't just about the math. It was about the truth. He was here. And he wasn't going anywhere. The week leading up to the quiz felt like a storm brewing in the halls of Redwood High. Every day, Jayden walked through the school as if the weight of the world were on his shoulders. It wasn't just the quiz anymore, it was the entire class's expectation that he would pull through. Marcus was relentless, and Jayden could feel the pressure building. "Are you ready for the test?" Talia asked, her voice light but with a hint of concern as they sat together in the cafeteria the day before the quiz. Jayden took a deep breath, his fingers tapping rhythmically on his tray. "I think so. But Marcus is going to bring it tomorrow. He's not going to let me win again without a fight." Talia raised an eyebrow. "I thought you weren't concerned about him." "I wasn't," Jayden said, looking out the window. "But he's making it personal now. It's not about math anymore. It's about who gets to wear the crown of smartest kid in class. And for some reason, he thinks it has to be him." Talia smiled softly. "Well, if anyone can take him down, it's you. You're not backing down, right?" Jayden turned to her, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Not now. Not ever." The next day, the atmosphere in the classroom was charged with electricity. Everyone had been talking about the quiz all week. Jayden could hear snippets of conversations around him as the bell rang and students took their seats. Marcus, sitting directly behind him, had a look of focused determination on his face. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't making jokes. It was all business now. Becker entered the room with the same calm demeanor as always, but there was something different about him today. Maybe it was the tension in the air, or maybe it was the way he stood a little taller as he set down the quiz papers on each desk. "This quiz," Becker began, "will test your ability to think critically, adapt quickly, and solve problems without your usual safety nets. It's about precision, creativity, and most of all, logic. Don't rush, but don't overthink. You have 60 minutes. Begin." Jayden took a deep breath, flipped the paper over, and scanned the first problem. It was a monster of a question, complex, layered, requiring multiple steps to solve. The kind of problem that would have made him second-guess himself a year ago. But now, Jayden saw it for what it was, a puzzle waiting to be solved. He dove in, each step more confident than the last. The numbers and formulas flowed smoothly in his mind, his hand moving across the paper almost instinctively. For a moment, he lost himself in the rhythm of solving the problems, the world outside of the classroom fading away. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. Marcus, glancing over at his paper, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting between the question and his notes. For a split second, Marcus's eyes met Jayden's, and in that brief moment, Jayden could see the same fear he had seen in his own eyes when he had first walked into this class. The fear of failure. The fear of not being enough. And it only made Jayden push harder. He wasn't going to let Marcus win, not this time. As the minutes ticked by, Jayden's mind worked faster, solving each problem with ease. But then came the last one, the final challenge. It was a word problem, a complicated real-world scenario involving calculus and rates of change. Jayden stared at it for a moment, the solution already forming in his mind, but it wasn't just about solving it. It was about finding the simplest, most elegant solution. His pen hovered over the paper as he wrote out the solution, each step methodical, precise, every variable accounted for. This was his moment, and he wasn't going to waste it. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the quiz, Jayden put his pen down and leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He felt the exhaustion from the mental effort, but more than that, he felt a sense of satisfaction. He had done his best. He had given everything he had. As the class filtered out of the room, Marcus remained at his desk a few moments longer, staring down at his paper, his hands gripping it tightly. When Jayden passed by him on the way out, Marcus looked up. "You think you've won, don't you?" he said, his voice low, almost like a growl. Jayden stopped and turned to him, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "It's not about winning. It's about proving that I belong here, Marcus. And I already did that." Marcus clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. But before he could say anything more, Jaden walked away. The next day, the results were posted on the bulletin board. Jaden stood in front of it with Talia, both of them waiting for the inevitable. The air was thick with anticipation as the other students crowded around. And there it was, at the top of the list. Jaden Carter, 100%. Below his name was a short comment, outstanding performance. Keep up the great work. The whispers started almost immediately. There were some surprised looks, some impressed nods, but mostly, there was silence. People were starting to realize that Jaden wasn't just some flash in the pan. He was the real deal. But the true test wasn't the grade itself. It wasn't the number at the top of the page. It was Marcus's reaction. Jaden looked over to see Marcus standing at the board, his face a mix of frustration and disbelief. He was staring at the score, his hands trembling slightly as he read the number again. Jaden didn't approach him. He didn't need to. The victory was his, quietly, without the need for confrontation. That afternoon, Jaden was sitting by himself in the courtyard when Talia found him again, a wide grin on her face. "I knew you'd do it," she said, sitting down beside him. "You didn't just beat Marcus. You beat the whole damn system." Jaden smiled, his eyes softening. "It wasn't just about beating Marcus. It was about proving to myself that I could do this. That I belonged here." Talia nodded, looking thoughtful. "You belong anywhere you want to be, Jaden. You just had to see it for yourself." Jaden looked out over the courtyard, his mind finally at ease. The storm was over, but the road ahead was just beginning. He had proven something to the world, but more importantly, he had proven it to himself. And that was all that mattered. The days after the quiz felt surreal. Jaden could hardly walk through the hallways without hearing murmurs or glances cast his way. It was as if his success had sent a shockwave through the school, and everyone, students, teachers, and even some parents, were still trying to grasp the full impact of it. It wasn't just about the test score anymore. Jaden had become something bigger, a symbol. It started with the whispers. They weren't the kind of whispers you hear in passing, but the kind that seemed to linger in the air, heavy with meaning. "Did you hear about Jaden Carter? Yeah, he's like, the smartest kid in the class now. Nobody expected that. I bet Marcus can't handle being second to him." It was strange, hearing his name float through the air like that. He wasn't used to being the subject of conversation, at least, not in this way. Jaden was walking to his locker when he noticed it for the first time. People weren't just whispering, they were looking at him differently. Some with admiration, some with curiosity, and others with a kind of uncertainty that he couldn't quite place. He'd never been the center of attention like this, and while a part of him felt proud, another part felt uneasy. He wasn't sure he was ready for what came next. Talia found him at lunch, her usual bright smile plastered on her face. But today, there was something different about her expression, something more knowing. "You okay?" she asked, sitting down across from him. Jaden shrugged, trying to act nonchalant. "Yeah, just, a little weird, you know." Talia raised an eyebrow. "You're not getting cold feet about being the smartest kid in class now, are you?" "No," Jaden replied quickly, his voice firm. "It's just that, everything's changed. I didn't expect all of this to come with it." "I know," she said, nodding. "It's like you've suddenly become the person everyone has their eyes on. And not just Marcus, either." Jaden frowned. "What do you mean?" "Well, remember how you used to just blend in? Now people are paying attention to every little thing you do. Some of them look up to you, some of them are jealous." Jaden glanced around the cafeteria. Some of the students from his class were looking at him. A few were even staring openly, their expressions a mix of awe and disbelief. It wasn't just the classmates he had expected to be watching him, there were also students he barely knew, nodding toward him or whispering among themselves. And then, there was the strangest part, some of the teachers were now looking at him differently, too. Becker, for instance, had pulled him aside after class that day. "Jaden," Becker said, his voice unusually soft. "That was an excellent performance on the quiz. I think you've really earned your place in this class. Just, don't let the pressure get to you. There's always a target on the back of someone who stands out." Jaden hadn't known how to respond to that. He wasn't sure what Becker meant by a target, but the warning stayed with him. The more people noticed him, the more he realized the consequences of standing out. The next day, as Jaden walked into his AP calculus class, Marcus was already there, sitting at his desk, a strange look in his eyes. He wasn't smiling like usual. Instead, his expression was tight, unreadable. Jaden took his seat, silently acknowledging Marcus with a nod. Marcus didn't respond. Becker came in shortly after, starting the lesson like it was any other day, but Jaden could feel the tension in the room. No one had said it out loud, but it was obvious. Marcus was still nursing his pride, and the others were caught in the middle of this ongoing battle for dominance. And then, unexpectedly, Becker announced, "I've decided to assign a group project for the rest of the semester. Each group will consist of 3 members, and you'll have to work together to solve complex problems that will involve everything we've covered in the last few weeks." Jaden felt the weight of the words before they even hit him. The room grew quiet as everyone began to process the news. Group projects were never easy. But now, with everything that had happened, it felt like the stakes were higher than ever. Becker continued, "I'll be assigning partners. This project will be graded not only on your problem-solving skills but also on how well you can collaborate. You'll be expected to work together and come to a consensus on every step of the solution." When Becker finished assigning the groups, Jaden found himself paired with Marcus. For a moment, the room was silent. Jaden couldn't help but feel a sinking sensation in his stomach. Marcus glanced over at him, his eyes hard. "Looks like we're partners," Jaden said, trying to sound casual. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He just stared at him for a long moment, his jaw clenched. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "This isn't over, you know. You may have won the quiz, but you haven't won the war." Jaden met his gaze, unfazed. "I'm not here to fight, Marcus. I'm just here to do the work." Marcus's lip curled into a sneer, but he didn't say anything else. The tension between them was thick enough to cut with a knife, but Jaden was determined not to let it distract him. He had come too far to let his own insecurities or anyone else's ego derail him now. Over the next few days, the project became more than just a school assignment. It became a battleground. Every conversation with Marcus felt charged, every interaction fraught with unspoken rivalry. But despite the tension, Jaden refused to let it affect the quality of their work. He didn't want to be distracted by petty arguments, he was here to prove something to himself, not to anyone else. The problem was, Marcus wasn't giving up. He kept challenging Jaden's ideas, questioning his every move. When Jaden suggested a method for solving one of the more complicated equations, Marcus would dismiss it, claiming it wasn't the right approach. Then, when Jaden stood firm, Marcus would reluctantly go along, but there was always a hint of condescension in his tone. Jaden began to wonder if Marcus was just trying to break him. If the quiz was really only the first round of a much larger competition. By the end of the week, Jaden's once calm and confident demeanor was beginning to crack. It wasn't the math that was wearing him down, it was the constant pressure. The pressure to stay ahead, to prove that he belonged in this world that so often seemed to reject him. And now, with Marcus constantly undermining him, it felt like everything he had worked for was slipping through his fingers. As he sat in the library late one night, trying to finish up the project, he realized something: this wasn't just about the class. It wasn't just about Marcus. This was about something much bigger. It was about self-belief. Jaden had spent so much of his life feeling like an outsider, like he didn't belong. But now, for the first time, he realized that he wasn't fighting to be accepted by anyone else. He was fighting for his own place in the world. And no matter how many challenges or obstacles Marcus threw his way, he wasn't going to back down. Jaden walked into the classroom with the weight of the project still heavy on his shoulders. The group assignment was nearing its final stage, and he had spent countless hours working with Marcus. Yet, no matter how hard he tried to focus on the math, the tension between them was palpable. Marcus had become more and more aggressive in the way he dismissed Jaden's ideas, and each attempt at collaboration felt like a battle of wills. Today, the atmosphere in the room was unlike any other. The air was thick with unspoken tension, not just between him and Marcus, but throughout the entire class. The project was due in 2 days, and the deadline had everyone on edge. Jaden could feel the anxious glances of his classmates, the pressure building in the room. As Jaden sat down at his desk, he saw Marcus across the room, his usual confident demeanor replaced with an unsettling seriousness. Marcus wasn't even bothering to pretend to be friendly anymore. He wasn't making small talk or trying to push Jaden's buttons with jokes. He was just waiting. Becker walked in, his usual calm presence settling over the room. He nodded to the class, his eyes briefly scanning the students before focusing on the project assignment. "I trust you all have made significant progress on your projects," Becker said. "Today, we'll be reviewing your work before you turn it in. I expect nothing less than excellence. If there's anything you're still uncertain about, now's the time to ask." The class was quiet. Jaden glanced at Marcus, who was scribbling something in his notebook. Marcus hadn't even looked at him when Becker spoke, his expression blank. Jaden had been hoping for a moment of cooperation, maybe even a breakthrough where they could set aside their rivalry and finish the project smoothly. But he wasn't sure if that would ever happen now. As the class moved into working groups, Becker began to circulate the room. He stopped by Jaden and Marcus's desk first, his eyes lingering on their project. "Looks solid," Becker said, glancing at their work. "But something's off here. I know you've been working hard, but the approach is a bit scattered. Jaden, Marcus, you're both sharp, but I can tell there's a disconnect. You need to align your thinking more." Jaden's stomach tightened. He hadn't expected Becker to notice, but he was right. The project didn't feel cohesive. There were parts of it where their approaches to the problems didn't match, where they had each tried to do things their own way, without coordinating. He glanced at Marcus, hoping to find a spark of understanding in his eyes, but Marcus was just staring down at the paper, his jaw set. "I think we can fix it," Jaden said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We just need to work together more." Marcus didn't respond immediately, but after a long, tense pause, he finally spoke. "Don't tell me what to do," he muttered. "I know how to solve these problems." Jaden felt a pang of frustration rise inside him, but he kept his cool. "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm suggesting we work together. We both need to get this right." Marcus slammed his pen down on the desk. "You just think you're better than me, don't you? You think because you scored higher than me on that quiz, you've got it all figured out. Well, newsflash, Jaden, I don't need you telling me what to do." The words hung in the air, and Jaden could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface. It wasn't about the project anymore. It was about Marcus's pride. It was about his refusal to admit that maybe, just maybe, Jaden had something to offer. Before Jaden could respond, Becker spoke again. Okay. Let's take a step back here." He looked at both of them with a level gaze. "I see what's happening. You both are talented, but you're letting your egos get in the way of the work. Marcus, Jaden's right. This project will only work if you both cooperate. If you can't, then I'll have no choice but to reevaluate the assignment's grading." The room fell silent as everyone turned their attention to Becker. Jaden felt a mix of relief and frustration. He had been hoping this wouldn't escalate, but now it was out in the open. Marcus's face was red with anger, but after a long pause, he nodded stiffly. "Fine," he muttered. "Let's finish this." Jaden's heart sank. He wasn't sure if Marcus was agreeing to cooperate or just agreeing to finish it out of sheer obligation. But at least, for now, they had an agreement. The rest of the class was awkward and tense, with both Jaden and Marcus working in silence, side by side, as they attempted to make the necessary changes to their project. It wasn't perfect, but they were getting through it. Jaden found himself focused more than ever, trying to push past the emotional strain of the situation and just finish the work. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Jaden stood up, exhausted but relieved. Marcus didn't say anything as he gathered his things and walked out, his head down. As Jaden was about to leave, Becker called out to him. "Jaden, can I have a word?" Jaden turned back to see Becker standing at the front of the room, motioning for him to come over. With a deep breath, Jaden walked up to him. "You did well today," Becker said, his tone more thoughtful than usual. "You kept your cool with Marcus, even when he was being difficult. That's something I respect. But I also want to say this, you're not just here to be a competitor. You're here to learn, to grow. Don't let anyone, not even Marcus, make you feel like you have to prove yourself. You're already where you need to be." Jaden felt a warmth spread through him, and for the first time in a while, he truly felt seen. It wasn't about the grades or the rivalry. It was about something deeper, something that only Jaden could control. His own growth. "Thanks, Mr. Becker," Jaden said quietly. Becker smiled and nodded. "Keep it up, Jaden. You've got a lot of potential." As Jaden walked out of the classroom, he realized something. The test had never been about outsmarting Marcus. It had always been about proving to himself that he could do it. Proving that, no matter what anyone else said, no matter how hard Marcus pushed back, Jaden belonged. For the first time, Jaden felt like he could finally breathe. His victory wasn't a one-time thing. It was the beginning of something much bigger. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days following the class project were supposed to be easier. After all, Jaden had managed to get through the tense partnership with Marcus and had even impressed Becker with his calm demeanor and determination. But the relief was short-lived. New challenges loomed on the horizon, and this time, they weren't just about math or rivalries. Jaden was about to face something much harder, the weight of expectations. The first sign that things were changing came when Jaden's mom sat him down one evening, her face etched with concern. He had just returned home after a long day of school, and she had been waiting for him in the living room. "Jaden, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity that made his stomach tighten. Jaden paused, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. "What's wrong, Mom?" She hesitated before speaking, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her sweater. "I've been talking to some of the school counselors, and there's been some talk about your future." Jaden blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "I'm just trying to get through high school, Mom. I'm not thinking about colleges yet or anything." His mom let out a small sigh, leaning forward. "That's just it, Jaden. They think you have potential. More than just potential. They think you could go far, like, really far. There's a scholarship program that's been brought up, and they want to nominate you for it." Jaden's mind went blank for a moment. He'd heard about these kinds of programs before, but they always seemed so far out of reach. The idea that someone wanted to put him forward for something like that, it felt overwhelming. "Why would they want me?" Jaden muttered, more to himself than his mom. "Because of how well you're doing," she replied softly. "Because of how hard you've worked, how much you've grown. They see something in you, Jaden. I see it too." As Jaden processed what his mom had said, a wave of anxiety washed over him. He hadn't asked for this attention, hadn't even considered the idea of a scholarship program or what it might mean for his future. It felt like too much. What if he wasn't ready? What if they expected too much from him? But what really bothered him was the realization that his entire life might be about to change. He had always known he was smart, he had always known that he could excel in school if he tried hard enough, but this was different. This was the first time anyone was acknowledging that potential in such a big way. It felt like there was now a spotlight on him, one that was bright and unforgiving. The next day at school, the pressure started to feel heavier. He wasn't just walking through the halls anymore, he was under a microscope. Everywhere he went, he felt eyes on him. His classmates, especially those who had always been skeptical of him, now looked at him differently. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't even curiosity. It was more like a kind of expectation, as if he had already achieved something great, and now everyone was just waiting for him to screw it up. Even Marcus seemed to be watching him more closely, though he never said a word. There was no smug look on his face this time, just a quiet, lingering intensity that seemed to follow Jayden around the classroom. Jayden didn't want to admit it, but it was starting to get to him. He had always prided himself on being able to handle pressure, but this was different. The weight of everyone's expectations, the pressure to live up to what they thought he could do, was starting to feel suffocating. By the end of the week, Jayden found himself feeling exhausted, mentally and physically. The usual excitement he felt about his studies was gone, replaced by a gnawing sense of doubt. Every test, every assignment, felt like it had a million consequences riding on it. Every mistake, no matter how small, felt like it would be the one that ruined everything. It all came to a head during a surprise quiz in his AP calculus class. Jayden had been studying, but the stress had taken a toll on him. His mind wasn't sharp, his focus was scattered, and when Becker handed out the quizzes, Jayden could feel his hands trembling as he flipped it open. The questions were difficult, more difficult than anything they had done before, and as Jayden sat there, he could feel his panic rising. His heart was pounding in his chest, and his mind was foggy. He kept going back to the same question, the one that had been tripping him up, and each time, he found himself staring at it in confusion. "Come on," he muttered to himself, trying to shake the fear off. "Just focus. You can do this." But the more he tried, the more his thoughts seemed to spiral. He could feel eyes on him, even though he knew everyone was focused on their own work. It didn't matter. The pressure felt like it was closing in on him from all sides. And then, just as the bell rang signaling the end of the quiz, Jayden realized he hadn't finished. His heart dropped. He had never left a quiz incomplete before. Not in his entire life. Becker walked to his desk as the class filed out. Jayden could barely look at him. "Everything all right, Jayden?" Becker asked, his tone unusually soft. Jayden swallowed hard, his throat tight. I don't know, Mr. Becker. I don't think I did well." Becker paused, considering his words. "Jayden, listen to me. It's okay if you don't get every question right. It's not the end of the world. But if this stress is getting to you, if it's affecting your work, it's time to take a step back and figure out what's really important." Jayden didn't respond, his mind still racing. All he could think about was how badly he had failed, how he had let everyone down. He was supposed to be the smart kid, the one who had it all together. But now, he was just another kid who couldn't handle the pressure. That night, as Jayden lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, everything felt like it was crashing down around him. The scholarship, the expectations, the pressure to be perfect, it was too much. He had worked so hard to prove himself, but now, all of it seemed meaningless. All he wanted was to breathe. And then, a thought struck him, a small, quiet voice in the back of his mind. Why am I doing this? He wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. Not to Marcus, not to his mom, not to the teachers, and definitely not to his classmates. The only person he needed to prove anything to was himself. The next morning, Jayden woke up with a renewed sense of clarity. He wasn't going to let the pressure crush him anymore. He wasn't going to let the expectations of others dictate who he was or what he could achieve. He had come too far to let this moment break him. He just needed to take it one step at a time, focus on what mattered most, and trust himself again. Jaden's walk to school that morning felt different. He wasn't rushing as he usually did, his steps no longer quickened by anxiety. The usual nervous tension in his shoulders, the familiar tightness in his chest, were absent. Instead, for the first time in weeks, Jaden walked with a quiet sense of resolve. He had made a decision. He wasn't going to let the pressure of others dictate how he felt anymore. It wasn't that he had all the answers, or that everything was suddenly going to be perfect. But he had realized something over the past few days: striving for perfection, the kind of perfection he had been chasing for so long, wasn't the same thing as growing. And growth was the one thing he truly wanted. He had spent so long trying to meet everyone else's expectations that he had lost sight of his own. Whether it was his mom's hopes for a scholarship, Marcus's silent judgment, or his teacher's pressure for him to excel, everything had been about what other people wanted from him, not what he wanted for himself. But now, that was going to change. Jaden's thoughts were interrupted when he walked into the classroom. As usual, there was a murmur of chatter in the room, but when he stepped inside, a sudden hush fell over the group. It was as if everyone noticed the change in him, his posture, his calm. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't being scrutinized, but rather, accepted. Marcus sat at his usual spot, looking up briefly as Jaden walked in, his eyes narrowing with an unreadable expression. Jaden didn't look back at him. Instead, he moved to his desk, placed his books down quietly, and sat. The atmosphere in the room was different. Lighter, almost. Like something had shifted in the air, though no one said a word. Becker entered shortly after, his eyes scanning the room. He walked to the front of the class, a slight smile on his face. "Good morning, everyone. Today, we're going to focus on something a little different. I've noticed that a lot of you are really pushing yourselves to the limit lately, especially after our last few assignments. But I want to remind you of something: perfection isn't the goal. Learning, growing, and improving, that's what we're really after." Jaden sat up straighter, listening closely. It was almost as if Becker had sensed exactly what he was going through. "Today, we're going to take a break from the tests, the grades, the stress. I want you to focus on something simple, solving problems for the joy of it, not because you have to. Take a moment to breathe, to appreciate how far you've come, and to let go of the pressure." For the first time in a long while, Jaden felt like someone truly understood him. Becker's words felt like a direct message to him. He didn't have to be perfect. He didn't have to constantly be the smartest, the fastest, or the most accomplished. He just needed to be present, engaged in the moment and focused on his own growth. The class worked through a few exercises in silence, but Jaden's mind was in a different place. As he solved each problem, he felt a sense of accomplishment, not because of a grade or a result, but because he was doing it for himself. For the first time in a long time, Jaden allowed himself to enjoy the challenge of learning without the crushing weight of expectations. At the end of the period, Becker assigned a homework problem, a simple one, a puzzle-like exercise that wasn't graded for difficulty, but for creativity. Jaden walked out of the classroom feeling lighter, a quiet smile on his face. The world hadn't changed, but his approach to it had. As he walked down the hallway, Marcus caught up to him, his footsteps heavy behind Jaden's. Jaden didn't turn around, but he knew Marcus was there. "Hey," Marcus said, his voice a little softer than usual. You looked different in class today. Something's going on, isn't it?" Jaden stopped walking, his gaze straight ahead. He hadn't expected Marcus to say anything, let alone to notice. "I just decided I wasn't going to let the pressure get to me anymore," Jaden replied, his voice steady. "I'm done trying to meet everyone else's expectations. I'm just going to do my best for me." Marcus was silent for a moment. Jaden could feel him processing the words, trying to figure out whether he was being sincere or just pretending to be okay. But when Marcus spoke again, his tone was different, no longer dismissive or judgmental, but almost respectful. "Yeah, I get it, Marcus muttered. I've been feeling that way too, actually. Like, everything's a competition, and I'm just trying to keep up, you know. Jaden turned to look at Marcus then, really looking at him for the first time in weeks. Marcus, too, had been under pressure. They were both just trying to stay afloat in a sea of expectations. Maybe they weren't as different as Jaden had thought. Later that night, Jaden sat down at his desk to work on the homework assignment that Becker had given them. It was the kind of problem that he would have usually tried to overcomplicate, but tonight, he took a different approach. He didn't care about the answer as much as he cared about the process. He spent hours working through it, enjoying each little discovery, each new connection. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the fastest solution. But it was his solution, and that was enough. As he finished, he sat back in his chair, feeling a sense of peace that he hadn't known in a long time. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't thinking about his grades, or Marcus, or the scholarship. He was thinking about what he loved, the thrill of solving problems, the satisfaction of learning. And in that moment, Jaden knew that he had made the right decision. He wasn't going to let anyone, no one, decide who he was or what he could achieve. Not his teachers. Not his classmates. And certainly not the weight of impossible expectations. The next day, Jaden entered the classroom feeling lighter than ever. He looked at Marcus, who caught his gaze for a brief moment. They exchanged no words, but something had shifted between them. The unspoken tension had eased, replaced by a quiet understanding. As the bell rang and Becker entered the room, Jaden settled into his seat, ready for whatever came next. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he had control, not over everything, but over the most important thing of all, himself. The week had passed uneventfully, or at least, as uneventfully as things could be when you were trying to find a new rhythm. Jaden had settled into a new mindset, one where he wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone, but was focused solely on his own growth. It wasn't perfect, and there were still days when the pressure threatened to creep back in, but he felt more in control than he had in a long time. However, things were about to change again. It was a Monday morning when Becker walked into the classroom, looking unusually excited. He stood in front of the class with an energy that was almost contagious. Jaden noticed immediately, Becker wasn't his usual, laid-back self. There was something else in his eyes today, something that hinted at a challenge. "Good morning, everyone." Becker began, his voice louder than usual. "I've got something different planned for today." The students exchanged curious glances, and Jaden's stomach tightened a little. He had grown used to Becker's unorthodox approach to teaching, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this time was different. "This semester, we're doing something new," Becker continued. "A competition. But not just any competition. This is a challenge that's going to test not only your academic skills but also your ability to think outside the box, work under pressure, and collaborate with others. It's called the Math Olympiad. The top students from each class will represent the school in the regional competition." A hush fell over the room. The name Math Olympiad hung in the air, heavy with significance. Jaden's heart rate picked up, and for a moment, he felt like the room had closed in around him. The thought of competing, of being one of the students chosen to represent the school, seemed both exciting and terrifying. Becker paused for a moment, scanning the room, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Now, I know some of you are already thinking about how much you might struggle with this. But listen, this isn't about being perfect. It's about showing how far you've come, pushing yourself, and working together. I want you to think of it as an opportunity, not a burden." Jaden felt his palms start to sweat. The pressure that had been building in his mind over the past few weeks seemed to intensify. He knew he could do well in math, but the idea of being chosen for something like this, of stepping up in front of everyone and competing on a bigger stage, it was daunting. The weight of everyone's expectations suddenly felt like it had returned. Becker walked around the room, his hands tucked behind his back. "I've seen a lot of potential in this class. I know some of you can handle this challenge. If you're interested, you'll be taking part in a practice round next week. I want to see how you handle it. From there, we'll determine who will represent the school. Jaden's mind raced. He had been trying so hard to let go of pressure, but now, it felt like it was back with a vengeance. Could he handle it? Would he be able to perform under the kind of scrutiny this competition would bring? Marcus, who had been silent during Becker's speech, finally spoke up. This sounds intense. Do you think we're ready for this? Becker turned to him, his smile widening. That's the point. You won't know until you try. But I believe you all have it in you. The bell rang, and the students shuffled out of the classroom, their conversations buzzing with nervous excitement. As Jaden walked down the hallway, his thoughts were consumed by the competition. It wasn't the math that worried him, it was the pressure. The pressure to succeed, to prove that he could handle something like this. He was used to feeling like he had to prove himself to others, but now it was different. This wasn't about anyone else. This was about him, and that made it even harder. That evening, Jaden sat at his desk, staring at the homework in front of him but unable to focus. His mind kept drifting back to the math Olympiad. Would he be good enough? What if he couldn't perform under pressure? He closed his textbook with a sigh, his frustration mounting. It felt like all the progress he had made, learning to let go of perfectionism, focusing on his own growth, was slipping away. He had spent so long trying to move beyond a constant need to be the best, to live up to everyone's expectations. But now, he was right back in the same place. His mom knocked gently on his door and poked her head in. Jaden, you okay? Jaden didn't look up immediately. I don't know, Mom. I'm just thinking about the competition Becker mentioned today. She walked in and sat on the edge of his bed, her expression softening as she looked at him. I know it's a lot to take in, but I believe in you. Jaden finally looked up, meeting his mom's eyes. I just don't want to fail. I don't want to let anyone down. His mom smiled gently. Jaden, listen to me. You don't have to be perfect. You never have to be perfect. You've already come so far, and that's what matters. Whatever happens with this competition, it's not about how well you perform, it's about how you challenge yourself. You're doing this for you, not for anyone else. Jaden swallowed hard. He had spent so long trying to meet everyone else's expectations that he had forgotten the most important part, the journey was his own. Thanks, Mom, he whispered, feeling a weight lift off his chest. The next day, Jaden decided he would sign up for the practice round. He wasn't going to let fear hold him back. He wasn't going to let the pressure break him. This wasn't about being perfect. It was about pushing himself, showing himself that he could handle challenges, no matter how daunting they seemed. The moment he signed up, he felt a shift inside him. It was no longer about being the best or winning. It was about learning and growing. Jaden didn't have to prove anything to anyone anymore. This competition, like everything else, was just another step in his journey. That afternoon, Marcus found Jaden after class. His usual cocky demeanor was gone, replaced with something a bit more vulnerable. You're doing the practice round, huh? Marcus asked, his voice quieter than usual. Jaden nodded. Yeah. I'm giving it a shot. Marcus gave a small, almost nervous laugh. I might sign up too. I mean, it's not like I'm gonna back down from a challenge, right? Jaden smiled. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how everyone does. For the first time in a while, there was no competition between them. It wasn't about beating the other person. It was about pushing themselves to be better, no matter the outcome. Jaden woke up to the bright light of the morning sun streaming through his window, but there was no warmth in it today. His mind was already racing with thoughts about the practice round. The competition had seemed like a distant event when Becker first mentioned it, but now, it was real. It was happening today. He had spent the past few days preparing, trying to shake the nerves that threatened to overwhelm him. The practice round wasn't the actual competition, but in Jaden's mind, it might as well have been. It felt like his moment to prove something to himself. The stakes were higher than ever. When Jaden walked into the classroom, the usual chatter had already started. Marcus was sitting in the back of the room, scanning a practice sheet that Becker had handed out the day before. His usual swagger was there, but Jaden could see a flicker of doubt behind his eyes. They were both feeling the pressure. Becker stood at the front, his eyes scanning the class with a mix of excitement and anticipation. "All right, class, I know you've all been preparing for this. The practice round is simple. It's designed to push you to think creatively, under time pressure. You'll be solving a series of problems, and while there's no official grading, I want you to treat it as if this were the real deal." Jaden took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. Becker's words were meant to calm them, but they only made his heart race faster. He glanced around the room, his eyes meeting Marcus's for a brief second. Marcus gave him a small nod, his expression tight, as if silently saying, "We've got this." Becker continued, "You'll work through these problems individually. Take your time, but remember, this is a test of how you handle pressure and how you solve problems on the fly. Don't worry about being perfect. Just focus on the process." The moment Becker said those words, Jaden felt a shift inside himself. It was like a switch flipped. For the first time in weeks, Jaden wasn't thinking about the outcome. He wasn't thinking about the prize, the scholarship, or the expectations. He was just going to focus on doing his best and learning from the experience. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual as Becker passed out the packets of problems. The moment Jaden held his, he felt the weight of the paper, the pressure building up inside him. The first problem was straightforward enough, basic algebra, but as the questions got more complex, Jaden's nerves began to creep back in. There were questions that challenged him, pushed him to think in ways he hadn't anticipated. He could feel his pulse quickening with each passing minute. For the first time in a long while, Jaden was no longer chasing the perfect answer. He was chasing the solution, piece by piece, focusing on each step. He reminded himself that it wasn't about getting everything right. It was about taking it one problem at a time. Jaden glanced around the room occasionally, trying not to let the others' movements distract him. Marcus was hunched over his paper, scribbling furiously, while the others seemed equally absorbed in their work. The silence was almost oppressive, and Jaden could feel the tension in the air. He looked back at his paper, the next problem staring back at him. It was a word problem, one of those that required not just numbers, but an understanding of logic and reasoning. Jaden read through it once, twice, then 3 times. It wasn't clicking. He felt a twinge of frustration rise in him, but he pushed it down. The solution was there, he just had to work through it. Minutes passed, and Jaden felt himself losing track of time. The other students were still scribbling away, and he had only completed half of the problems. But rather than panic, Jaden focused. "I've got this." It wasn't about rushing, it was about understanding, about finding the right path to the answer. His mind raced through the strategies he had learned in the past few weeks: break the problem down, look for patterns, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. With that mindset, the next problem came together. Then another. Slowly, Jaden was making progress, but there were still some problems that felt just out of reach. As the final 10 minutes approached, Jaden glanced at his sheet one more time. He had completed most of the problems, but there were a few tricky ones left. His mind was tired, but he wasn't ready to give up. He refused to let the pressure derail him now. Marcus was already finishing up, but Jaden knew better than to compare himself. He wasn't racing against Marcus, or anyone else. He was racing against his own doubts, his own fears. Becker called time just as Jaden was finishing the last problem. He sat back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. The pressure lifted from his shoulders for the moment. He hadn't finished every problem perfectly, but he had done his best. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Becker stepped forward, collecting the packets. "All right, everyone. You did great. I'm proud of all of you for stepping up to this challenge. We'll go over the answers tomorrow, but remember, this isn't about the score. It's about how you think, how you approach problems. You're all on the right path. As the class filed out, Jaden couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The tension that had gripped him all morning had melted away. He had made it through. He had faced the challenge head-on and come out the other side, stronger for it. As he walked out of the classroom, Marcus caught up to him, a small grin on his face. "Hey, you did okay, man." Jaden gave him a tired but genuine smile. "Yeah. I think I did better than I expected." Marcus nodded, his expression softening. "Me too. It's not about being perfect, right?" Jaden nodded. "Exactly." The rest of the day passed in a blur, and Jaden found himself thinking less about the competition and more about the journey. He had stepped up, faced his fear, and done the work. No matter what happened next, that was enough. That night, as Jaden lay in bed, he couldn't help but smile. The pressure that had once weighed him down seemed lighter now. He hadn't finished the practice round in first place, but he had finished it with integrity. And that, Jaden realized, was the true victory. Jaden felt a knot tighten in his stomach as he walked into class the next day. Today was the day. Becker was going to hand back the practice round results. The sense of calm he'd felt the night before, after finishing the practice round, seemed to have evaporated. Now, it felt like everything was building up to this moment. Was he good enough? Had he done enough to prove himself? As he entered the classroom, he noticed a palpable buzz in the air. His classmates were huddled together in groups, talking in low voices, the nervous energy spreading like wildfire. Jaden's eyes darted to the front of the room, where Becker was already standing, looking as calm as ever. He was holding a stack of papers in his hand. "All right, everyone, settle down," Becker called, his voice steady. The room grew quieter, though the tension remained thick. "I've got your results from the practice round. Remember, this is just a stepping stone, not the end goal. Don't get too caught up in the numbers. This is about how you think, how you approach problems." Jaden's palms started to sweat. He tried to focus on Becker's words, but the sound of the teacher's voice seemed to blur as his heart began to race. Becker started calling out names. One by one, the students walked up to the front of the room to receive their papers. Jaden felt his breath catch as he waited. Marcus went up first, his usual confidence returning, though there was a flicker of anxiety in his eyes. When he came back to his seat, he gave Jaden a quick look, his lips pressed tightly together. No words, just a look that spoke volumes. Jaden swallowed hard and tried to focus on breathing. He had done his best, and that was all he could control. But what if it wasn't enough? What if it wasn't the right kind of best? "Jaden," Becker finally called, his voice slicing through the silence. Jaden stood up, his legs feeling like they were made of lead. As he walked to the front, his thoughts swirled in his mind. What if he had missed something obvious? What if he had made a mistake somewhere that would cost him? When Jaden reached the front, Becker handed him his paper with a smile. "You did well," Becker said quietly, giving him a nod. Jaden glanced down at the paper, his eyes scanning the results. There were check marks next to most of the problems, but there were also a few X's, problems he hadn't quite solved, mistakes he hadn't caught in time. His stomach dropped as he tried to keep his expression neutral. Becker seemed to notice his reaction and stepped closer. "Listen, Jaden. I know you didn't finish everything, but you showed tremendous growth today. You worked through the tough problems with focus, and that's what matters." Jaden nodded, trying to keep his emotions in check. "Growth," Becker had said. Not perfection. It was the word that had been echoing in his mind over the past few weeks, but hearing it from Becker felt different. It felt like validation. Becker's voice softened. "I've seen the way you approach challenges. You're not just solving problems, you're thinking about them, considering different angles. You're ready for the next step. I'm confident you'll do well. Jaden's heart swelled with a mix of pride and relief. He had done better than he expected, and more importantly, he had done it in a way that felt true to himself. The pressure that had been gnawing at him was finally starting to loosen its grip. As Jaden walked back to his seat, he glanced at Marcus, who was now looking over his own paper. Marcus caught his eye and gave him a small, almost sheepish grin. "Not as bad as I thought," Marcus muttered. Jaden nodded, a quiet laugh escaping him. "Yeah. Same here." It was then that Becker spoke again, raising his voice for the entire class. "I know some of you may be disappointed by your results, and I know others are feeling pretty good about them. But remember, this is only one piece of the puzzle. The real test is how you apply what you've learned moving forward. The Math Olympiad is coming, and it's going to be harder. But we've got a solid group here, and I believe each of you has the potential to go far." Jaden felt a warmth spread through him at Becker's words. The sense of camaraderie, of unity, that had been missing before started to form. Everyone in this class was going through the same thing, facing their fears, working to push past their limits. The bell rang, and students began to file out of the room. Jaden was about to head out when Becker called him over. "Jaden," Becker said with a smile, "I wanted to let you know something." Jaden stopped in his tracks, unsure of what to expect. "Yeah. You're one of the top performers in this round," Becker said, his tone matter-of-fact but warm. "I think you've got what it takes to represent the school in the regional competition." Jaden felt his heart race. "Wait, seriously?" Becker nodded. "You've shown excellent problem-solving skills and perseverance. It's not just about getting every answer right, it's about how you handle challenges. And you did that really well." Jaden's mind spun. A part of him felt excited at the opportunity, at the chance to prove himself on a bigger stage. But another part of him still felt the weight of the pressure. The competition was real now. There would be no turning back. "I'm honored," Jaden said, his voice quieter than he meant it to be. "You should be," Becker replied with a grin. "You've earned it. Now, I want you to keep pushing yourself. The real work starts now." As Jaden left the classroom, the excitement bubbled inside him. He was going to represent the school in the Math Olympiad. The pressure was back, but it was different this time. It wasn't about perfection. It was about growth. It was about pushing himself, facing the challenges, and seeing just how far he could go. For the first time, Jaden felt like he was ready. Ready to take on whatever came next, ready to grow even further, and ready to prove, not to anyone else, but to himself, that he could overcome any obstacle that stood in his way. The day after Becker told Jaden about representing the school at the Regional Math Olympiad, Jaden barely slept. The excitement and nerves churned inside him like a constant buzz. He had never felt such a mix of emotions before, but as the morning light crept into his room, he knew one thing for sure: the hard part was just beginning. As Jaden walked into school that morning, he felt a strange mixture of pride and anxiety. The word was already out: he had earned a spot in the regional competition. A few of his classmates, including Marcus, offered congratulatory nods, but Jaden could sense the eyes on him. He had done well in the practice round, but the real pressure was now on. The training for the regional competition would be intense, and he knew the stakes were higher than ever. Becker had already warned the class. "We have less than a month until the regional event," he had said yesterday, his voice serious. "We'll be focusing on advanced strategies and solving problems under timed conditions. Every single minute counts from here on out. Jaden, Marcus, and the rest of you who have qualified, you're going to have to work harder than ever to prepare." Jaden's stomach clenched at the thought of the long hours ahead. He had barely scratched the surface of what he would need to know for the regional level, and he was already feeling the weight of that realization. By the time the bell rang for the first official training session after the practice round, Jaden was already seated at the front of the room. Becker's reputation for pushing his students was well known, but Jayden had no idea just how demanding this training would be. As the class settled in, Becker stood at the front, holding a stack of problem sets. "Alright, we're starting today with a series of timed drills. You're going to work on these problems in groups, but I want you to approach them as if you were in the actual competition. We'll do this over and over until you start to feel the rhythm." Jayden turned to Marcus, who was already flipping through the problem set with a serious look on his face. "You ready for this?" Jayden asked. Marcus nodded without looking up. "You better believe it. I'm not letting you get ahead this time." Jayden smiled slightly. The tension was real, but so was the drive to succeed. They were in this together, even if the competition between them was only getting tougher. Becker handed out the first set of problems. "You've seen problems like these before, but today, I want you to solve them with precision. No shortcuts. No guesswork. Time is ticking." The room quieted as the students immediately dove into their work. Jayden felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as he looked at the first problem. It wasn't easy, not by a long shot, but it wasn't impossible. As he began working through it, he realized just how much faster he needed to go. Every second counted, and yet the complexity of the questions only seemed to grow as the minutes passed. He could hear Marcus's pen scratching across the paper beside him, the same focused rhythm that Jayden had come to expect. They were in sync, their minds working together even if their answers were different. Jayden's mind raced as he solved the problem, checking his work over and over. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. As the timer ran down, Jayden completed the first question, but there were still 3 more to go. He pushed aside the feeling of panic that crept in and moved on to the next one. After the first set of drills, Becker called the students together for a brief debrief. "Alright," Becker said, "let's see how you did. Marcus, Jayden, both of you are getting faster, but don't let the pressure get to you. Focus on the reasoning, not just the final answer." Jayden nodded, his mind still buzzing with the questions they had just tackled. He was faster than he had ever been, but there were still some problems that had taken him longer to solve than he wanted. He wasn't satisfied with that. Not yet. Becker continued, his voice firm. "You've got the skills, but now it's about how well you handle the pressure. You'll face problems like these and worse at the regionals. You need to learn how to handle stress and maintain focus under time constraints. You have to train your brain to think quickly and clearly, even when it's difficult." The words stuck with Jayden. The pressure. The stress. He had always been good at math, but now he realized there was so much more to it than just getting the right answer. It was about how he approached the problems, how he handled himself under pressure. Over the next few weeks, Jayden found himself spending more and more time at school, practicing with his classmates. Every day after school, Becker would hold extra practice sessions, and Jayden would be there, pushing himself to the limit. He worked late into the evening, sometimes staying up until midnight, reviewing problems, rereading his notes, and practicing under timed conditions. Marcus was there with him, his competitive edge sharper than ever, but they began to form an unspoken bond through the long hours of study. Despite the rivalry, there was a quiet respect between them. They both wanted the same thing, to succeed. But more than that, they wanted to prove to themselves that they could take on this challenge. One afternoon, as they sat together during a study break, Jayden leaned back in his chair, letting out a breath. "Man, I never realized how much goes into this. It's not just the problems. It's everything else too, the pressure, the mental exhaustion, trying to stay sharp." Marcus nodded, staring at his notes. "Yeah, it's crazy. But you're handling it, Jayden. I can see the difference. You're faster now, more confident. Just remember, don't burn yourself out." Jayden smiled, grateful for the advice. "Thanks. I'll try not to." As the days passed, the pressure only mounted. But for Jayden, it felt like he was becoming something different, something stronger. He wasn't just solving equations or memorizing formulas, he was learning to think critically and quickly, and it was making a difference. He was beginning to see patterns and connections that hadn't been clear before. When Becker called the class together for the final mock exam before the regional competition, Jayden felt a mixture of excitement and nerves. This was it. The final test before the real thing. If he could handle this mock test, he knew he was ready. As he walked to his seat, Becker gave him a nod of encouragement. "This is the real deal now, Jayden. You've got this." Jayden nodded, the words settling deep inside him. He had trained for this moment, and now it was time to face it head-on. The morning of the final mock exam felt different. The air seemed heavier, and Jayden couldn't shake the feeling that this test would be the moment everything he'd worked for would be put to the ultimate trial. His palms were sweaty as he walked into the classroom, his mind racing with thoughts of the upcoming competition. The clock ticked down the minutes on the wall, each second feeling like an eternity. Today's test would mirror the actual math Olympiad as closely as possible, timed, intense, with problems that ranged from the familiar to the nearly impossible. Jayden had done his best to prepare, but the anxiety still gnawed at him. He walked into the room, greeted by the familiar sound of Becker's voice instructing the class to sit down. "All right, everyone. Today's test is the last chance to see where you stand. I want you to give it everything you've got. Remember, this is about performance under pressure. How you handle the challenges in front of you will determine your readiness for the regionals." Jayden sat at his desk, his heart beating faster as Becker handed out the test papers. The weight of the moment was undeniable. This wasn't just about grades, this was about proving to himself that he was ready for the real competition. His eyes glanced over the first few problems, familiar faces, problems he had practiced countless times before. But then, he turned the page. Jayden's heart sank as he stared at the first question on the next page. It was unlike anything he had ever seen in their practice sessions. The equations were complicated, the numbers daunting. His breath hitched in his chest as panic began to creep in. His fingers drummed nervously on the desk. "Focus," he reminded himself. "Don't panic." He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to calm his mind. He had faced challenges before, difficult problems, moments of doubt, and each time, he had found a way to push through. This time wouldn't be different. Slowly, Jayden started to work through the problem, his mind racing as he mentally broke down the equation into smaller parts. The seconds ticked away, but he ignored the clock. The test wasn't about speed, it was about solving the problem thoroughly. He could feel the pressure building, but he didn't let it break his concentration. As the hours passed, Jayden moved from one problem to the next, his mind shifting gears, his confidence growing with each challenge he faced. Some questions stumped him, but he worked through them, finding the right approach, even if it took longer than he wanted. There were moments when he doubted himself, moments when he thought the problems might be too hard, that maybe he wasn't ready, but every time he pushed through that doubt, he felt stronger. Near the end of the test, Jayden looked up from his paper. His hands were shaking, his head pounding, but he had reached the final problem. This one was a real beast, complex, requiring multiple steps and strategies he hadn't seen before. He could feel his brain buzzing, but there was no turning back now. The timer was ticking down, and he was determined to finish strong. He worked quickly but methodically, approaching the problem from every angle. Each step felt like a victory. As he completed the final equation and looked over his work, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. There was no more room for doubt. He had done it. Becker stood up as the bell rang, signaling the end of the test. "All right, pencils down," Becker announced. "Time's up." Jayden leaned back in his chair, his body exhausted, but there was a sense of quiet pride within him. He had given his all, and now, it was out of his hands. As the rest of the class shuffled out, Becker asked everyone to stay behind. "Jayden, Marcus, I want to talk to you both," Becker said. Jayden's heart skipped a beat as he walked to the front of the room. Marcus was already standing there, his usual cool demeanor masking the same nerves Jayden could feel in his own chest. "Both of you did well today," Becker said, his tone serious but approving. "The final test was tough, and you both handled it with focus and clarity. I'm proud of the progress you've made." Marcus gave a small nod, but Jayden could see the edge of competition still burning behind his eyes. He had done well, no doubt about that, but Marcus wouldn't let him rest easy. The rivalry between them was alive and well. "But," Becker continued, "I can tell that both of you are feeling the pressure. And you should. This competition is going to test you in ways you've never been tested before. But you're both ready. I believe in you." Jayden felt a surge of confidence at Becker's words. "Thanks, Mr. Becker," he said quietly. Becker gave him a sharp look. "Don't thank me yet. The real test comes in a few days. But today, you showed me you have what it takes to be successful." As Jayden walked out of the classroom, the weight of Becker's words hung in the air. He had survived the final mock exam, and Becker believed in him. But now the real competition was just around the corner. There was no turning back. He would have to face it head-on. Walking down the hallway, Jayden found himself staring at his phone, scrolling through messages from his mom, his friends, even a few random classmates who had congratulated him. Everyone was rooting for him, but in the back of his mind, Jayden couldn't help but wonder if he was truly ready. "This is it," he thought to himself. "The real test. The regionals. I have to give everything I've got." He thought about the long nights, the hours spent solving problems, the doubts that crept into his mind. He thought about Marcus, the fierce competitor who had been pushing him to get better. He thought about Becker, the teacher who believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. "I can do this," Jayden whispered to himself, feeling a quiet determination building inside him. He was ready. He had trained for this moment, and no matter what, he was going to face the Math Olympiad head-on and prove that he belonged there. The morning of the Math Olympiad arrived. The sun had barely risen, and Jayden was already sitting at the kitchen table, trying to force down a bowl of cereal. His mom had made breakfast, but the butterflies in his stomach made it hard to swallow. He was trying to focus, to feel the calm that Becker had urged him to find. But every second, his nerves grew tighter. "Jayden, you okay?" his mom asked, looking over at him with a smile that didn't quite mask the concern in her eyes. She had seen how hard he had worked over the past few weeks, and she knew how much this meant to him. "I'm fine, Mom," he said, forcing a smile. "Just nervous." She gave him a knowing look and walked over to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've trained for this. You've put in the work, and you're ready. Just do your best, okay?" Jayden nodded, trying to calm the storm inside his chest. He could hear Becker's voice in his head, "Focus, stay calm, think through the problems. You've got this." But as he finished his breakfast and grabbed his bag, the reality of the situation hit him. This wasn't just another practice round. This was the real thing, the competition that could define everything. He was representing his school, his friends, his family, and most of all, himself. The bus ride to the venue felt long, even though it was only about 30 minutes. Jayden sat next to Marcus, who, despite his usual cocky demeanor, seemed a little tense today. There were no jokes, no friendly competition, just a silent acknowledgement that today was a big deal. "You ready?" Jayden asked, trying to break the ice. Marcus glanced at him, then looked forward. "Yeah. But I don't know. This is different. I mean, we've worked for this, but this is the real thing. We can't afford to mess up." Jayden nodded, feeling that same unease in his chest. He had worked so hard to get here, but now that they were on the brink of it, doubt started to creep in. He could almost hear the loud voices in his head. What if I'm not good enough? What if I choke? What if I let everyone down? But then he remembered Becker's words, the advice he had given him over the past few weeks. It's not just about solving problems. It's about solving them under pressure. Stay focused, stay calm, and trust yourself. They arrived at the venue, and Jayden stepped off the bus, his legs feeling a little like jelly. The building was large, filled with groups of students walking in the same direction. The atmosphere was buzzing with nervous energy. Jayden could hear snippets of conversation from other students, some were excited, others were visibly anxious. He wasn't alone in feeling the pressure. As he walked into the auditorium with Marcus and the others, Jayden was struck by how much bigger everything seemed compared to their school's practice sessions. Rows upon rows of desks filled the space, each one occupied by a student from a different school. Some were staring at their notes, others pacing nervously. It was clear, this was a competition of the best math students in the region. Okay, listen up. Becker's voice cut through the crowd, and Jayden turned to see his teacher standing by the front of the room, clipboard in hand. You all know the drill. The test will last 3 hours. There are 5 sections, each progressively harder than the last. Remember, stay calm, stay focused, and do your best. Jayden nodded, his nerves tightening again. 3 hours. 5 sections. He felt the weight of it all sink in, but he tried to shake off the fear. You've trained for this. You're ready. The test began, and Jayden dove into the first section with the intensity of a soldier going into battle. The problems were familiar, basic algebra, geometry, and number theory, but the pressure of the clock ticking down made each answer seem harder to find. The minutes seemed to slip by faster than ever, but Jayden worked through the problems, one after another. He didn't linger, didn't hesitate. He focused, moving from one question to the next. As the first section ended, Becker gave a brief nod of approval. Jayden couldn't help but glance at Marcus, who had finished with a slight smirk on his face. Just keep going, Jayden, he reminded himself. He couldn't worry about Marcus. This was his race. The second section came next. The problems were tougher now, testing skills and concepts that Jayden had barely skimmed in their practices. But he stayed calm, solving them methodically. The clock was his enemy, but he was determined to pace himself. With each passing minute, he could feel the challenge getting bigger, the pressure mounting, but he refused to let it crush him. By the third section, Jayden's confidence was starting to waver. The problems were more complex than anything he had faced in the mock tests. Some of them required multiple steps, some seemed completely out of reach. Jayden could feel the doubt creeping in again, whispering that maybe he wasn't good enough, that maybe he had gotten lucky in practice. But then, he remembered what Becker had said, "You've got this, Jayden. You've faced worse. You know how to handle this." With a deep breath, Jayden dove into the next problem. And then another. One at a time. The clock was ticking, but he refused to let it control him. With every problem solved, his confidence grew, even if just a little. As the final section arrived, Jayden's mind was spinning. His hand ached from writing for so long, and his eyes were starting to blur from the strain. But there was no time to stop. The final section was a beast, problems that required every ounce of knowledge he had accumulated over the past few months. Jayden moved through them, struggling at times, but pushing forward. The clock seemed to speed up as the final minutes approached. Jayden was on the last problem, and it was a doozy. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he raced to finish it. He looked at the clock. 10 seconds left. He scribbled down his final answer, just as the bell rang. Pencils down. Becker's voice rang out through the room. Jayden exhaled, his body tense, his mind exhausted. He had done his best. He couldn't have done more. As he stood up from his desk and walked out of the auditorium, he could see Marcus already out the door, his face unreadable. Jayden felt his stomach twist. There was nothing left to do but wait. The results would come later, but for now, all he could do was think about the test he had just taken. And about the moment when he'd finally face the true challenge ahead. Jayden sat in the cafeteria, a tray of untouched food in front of him, his fingers nervously tapping on the table. The results of the math Olympiad were supposed to be posted online by 4 p.m., but the clock had already passed that time, and there was still no sign of the results. It felt like the longest wait of his life. Beside him, Marcus was texting furiously on his phone, his usual cool composure replaced by an air of impatience. Jayden could tell Marcus was just as anxious as he was, but the prideful mask he wore didn't allow him to show it. "Any word yet?" Jayden asked, breaking the silence. Marcus glanced up at him, his face tight. "Nothing. It's ridiculous. They should have posted it by now." Jayden nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He had given it his all during the competition. He knew he had solved a lot of tough problems, but the doubt still lingered in the back of his mind. What if he had missed something? What if the other competitors were better? What if Marcus had done better? His phone buzzed suddenly, pulling him out of his thoughts. He looked down at the screen. It was a notification from the competition website. "The results are now live. Click here to see your placement." His heart stopped for a moment. He looked over at Marcus, who had already pulled up the same notification on his phone. They both hesitated for a second, the weight of the moment sinking in. Jayden swallowed hard and clicked the link. The page loaded slowly, the numbers on the screen dancing in front of his eyes. It felt like time had slowed to a crawl as he scrolled down, his stomach twisting tighter with every second. And then, there it was. Jayden Taylor, first place. His jaw dropped. He blinked at the screen, unable to process the words in front of him. It couldn't be right. There must have been a mistake. But as he refreshed the page, the results remained the same. Jayden Taylor, first place. His heart surged, and for a moment, the world around him blurred. The weight of the words settled in, and the realization hit him like a freight train. He had done it. He had won. "Oh my God," Jayden whispered, his voice shaky. He looked at Marcus, who had his eyes locked on his phone, his face unreadable. "Marcus. I won." Marcus didn't immediately respond. Instead, he stared at the screen, his expression darkening as he scanned the results. Jayden's victory hung in the air, but the silence between them felt strange, like something unspoken. Finally, Marcus looked up, his eyes flickering with a mix of pride and frustration. "You did it," he said, his voice tight but honest. "You really did it." Jayden's chest swelled with emotion. For months, he had been chasing a dream, one that felt so far out of reach. But now, standing at the pinnacle of that dream, all the hard work, the late nights, the doubts, and the struggles felt like they had led him here. To this moment. The feeling was surreal, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. "Thanks, Marcus," Jayden said, his voice cracking slightly. "You pushed me to be better. I wouldn't have gotten here without you." Marcus gave him a small nod, though there was a hint of something else behind his eyes, something that wasn't entirely jealousy, but still a reminder of the fierce competition between them. "We both pushed each other. But you really crushed it." Jayden smiled. "We did it." Later that day, Jayden's phone buzzed again. It was a message from Mr. Becker. "Jayden, I just saw the results. I knew you had it in you. Congratulations on your win. This is just the beginning. I'm proud of you." Jayden's heart swelled as he read the message. After everything he had been through, the late nights, the doubts, the struggle, it all felt worth it in this moment. Mr. Becker had believed in him when he wasn't sure he could believe in himself. And now, here he was, standing at the top, with a win that felt more meaningful than anything he had ever imagined. The next few days were a whirlwind. News of Jayden's victory spread quickly throughout the school, and soon he was being congratulated by friends, teachers, and even people he didn't know. It was an overwhelming feeling, but also one of pride. The doubts he had felt all along had melted away, replaced by a sense of accomplishment he had never known before. But as the excitement died down, Jayden found himself reflecting on what he had learned during this journey. He thought about the late nights spent solving problems, about the pressure he had faced, about Marcus and the competition that had pushed him further than he thought possible. He thought about Becker's words, about the importance of perseverance, of trusting in himself when everything seemed stacked against him. And he thought about the moment when he realized that the only person standing in his way was himself. The competition was never about beating anyone else, Jayden thought. It was about overcoming my own doubts and fears. Week later, Jayden stood in front of the school assembly, ready to accept his award for first place in the Math Olympiad. As he walked to the front, the entire room broke into applause. For a moment, Jayden felt the weight of all their expectations on his shoulders. But this time, it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like a triumph. He took the microphone, his hands shaking slightly as he looked out at the sea of faces. I don't really know what to say, he began, his voice surprisingly steady. I didn't do this alone. This was my journey, but there were a lot of people who helped me along the way. My mom, my friends, and Mr. Becker. Without all of you, I wouldn't be standing here today. He paused for a moment, looking out over the crowd. And to everyone who doubted me, who thought I couldn't do it, thank you. You made me stronger. The crowd erupted in applause again, and Jayden couldn't help but smile. This wasn't just about math anymore. This was about overcoming every obstacle that had ever stood in his way. As Jayden walked off the stage, Marcus caught up to him, grinning from ear to ear. You really did it, man. Proud of you. Thanks, Marcus. We both did it, Jayden said, clapping him on the back. We pushed each other. And now, who knows? Maybe we can both make it to nationals next year. Marcus grinned, his competitive edge back. You bet. Just wait until next year. I'm coming for you. Jayden laughed, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. No matter what happened next, he knew one thing for sure, he had found his confidence. He had found his place in the world, and nothing would take that away from him. It had been a few weeks since Jayden's victory at the Math Olympiad, and the euphoria of winning had finally settled into something more grounded. He had returned to his regular routine, school, homework, hanging out with his friends, but now, something felt different. There was a new sense of purpose in the way he approached each day. The trophies and certificates had been proudly displayed at home, but they didn't fill him with the same excitement anymore. Sure, he was proud of his accomplishment, but the taste of victory had already begun to fade. He had gone from feeling like an underdog to standing at the top of his game, but what was next? It was the Monday after spring break when Jayden walked into Mr. Becker's classroom, carrying his backpack over one shoulder and a half-formed question in his mind. Mr. Becker was seated at his desk, his glasses perched on the tip of his nose as he sorted through papers. Morning, Jayden, Mr. Becker greeted him without looking up. How's the post-victory life treating you? Good, just, different, Jayden replied, leaning against the desk. I feel like I've reached this big goal, but now I don't know what to aim for next. Mr. Becker glanced up at him, the familiar spark in his eyes lighting up. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. Jayden raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Well, Mr. Becker began, setting down the papers and folding his hands, I've been thinking about your potential. You're not just another student who's good at math, you have something special, Jayden. I think it's time you started thinking about the bigger picture. Jayden felt a flutter of excitement and anxiety all at once. What bigger picture? Mr. Becker's smile widened. National Math Olympiad. Jayden blinked, the words hanging in the air like a challenge he hadn't expected. National. I've never even thought about that. I'm just happy with what I've done so far. I know, Mr. Becker said, his voice calm and reassuring. But you're ready for it. I can see it in the way you approach problems. You think about them differently than most students. You have the ability to push past the surface and dig deeper. And you've already proved that you can handle the pressure of competition. Jayden felt his heart race as the thought of competing on a national level began to take root in his mind. The National Math Olympiad was a huge step up from the regional competition. It would be the ultimate test of his skills, a place where the best of the best competed. But I don't know if I'm ready, Jayden said, his voice unsure. That sounds like something someone a lot smarter than me would do. Mr. Becker chuckled. I've seen many students come and go, Jayden. What separates those who make it to the top from those who don't is their willingness to push beyond their limits. And you've already done that. The question isn't whether you're ready, it's whether you're willing to take that next step. Jayden sat in silence for a moment, weighing Mr. Becker's words. The idea of competing nationally felt both exhilarating and terrifying. He had pushed himself beyond what he thought he was capable of before, but this would be a whole new level. What if I fail? He asked quietly. What if I'm not good enough? Mr. Becker leaned forward, his tone more serious. Failure is part of growth. You won't fail if you're learning from every experience. But if you never try, you'll never know what you're capable of. Remember, Jayden, you've already exceeded your own expectations. So, what's stopping you from going further? Jayden felt a spark of determination within him, one that had been buried under layers of doubt. He had come so far, overcome so much, and this challenge felt like the next natural step. What do I need to do? Jayden asked, his voice steady now. Mr. Becker smiled, proud of the decision Jayden had just made. First, we'll need to sign you up. Then, we'll focus on your preparation. It won't be easy, it'll take everything you've got. But I believe you're ready for it. The competition will be tough, but with the right mindset and hard work, you have a real shot at making it. The following weeks were a whirlwind of intense preparation. Jayden threw himself into studying, reviewing material from previous national Olympiads and practicing with more advanced problems. He would meet with Mr. Becker after school, discussing strategies and tackling difficult questions together. There were moments when Jayden felt overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information, but Mr. Becker was always there to guide him, breaking things down into manageable chunks and encouraging him to keep pushing forward. Jayden also found himself revisiting his old self-doubt, especially when the problem seemed too complex to solve. He would stare at a question for minutes on end, unsure of where to even begin. But then, he would think back to his experience in the regional competition, the way he had persevered through the tough moments, and it would give him the strength to keep going. One afternoon, as Jayden was working through a particularly tough set of problems, he felt a tap on his shoulder. He looked up to see Marcus standing there, a smirk on his face. I heard you're going for the national competition now, Marcus said. You're really going all in, huh? Jayden smiled, the competition between them never quite gone. Yeah. I'm giving it everything I've got. Marcus's smirk turned into something more genuine. Well, good luck, man. I guess you're gonna need it. But if anyone can do it, it's you. Jayden appreciated the support, even if it was laced with Marcus's competitive spirit. The truth was, Marcus had always pushed him to be better, even when they were rivals. And now, they were both chasing their own versions of success. The night before the National Math Olympiad, Jayden couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Tomorrow was the day, he would finally face the ultimate test. He knew it wouldn't be easy, that he would be up against some of the brightest young minds in the country. But for the first time, he felt a deep sense of clarity. He wasn't just doing this to win, he was doing it to prove to himself that he was capable of anything. He thought about his journey, how far he had come, how much he had grown. He thought about all the late nights spent studying, all the times he had doubted himself. But more than anything, he thought about what Mr. Becker had said, the question isn't whether you're ready, it's whether you're willing to take that next step. Jayden knew now that he was ready. He had taken the leap time and time again, and every step had led him to this moment. The next morning, Jayden stood in front of the venue where the National Math Olympiad was being held. The doors opened, and he walked inside, his heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. This was it, the next challenge, the one he had been preparing for. The future was unwritten, but Jayden felt certain of one thing: he was ready to take it on. The morning of the National Math Olympiad was unlike any other day Jayden had experienced. He stood outside the grand building, his fingers fidgeting with the edges of the program in his hands, staring at the soaring structure before him. The weight of the moment pressed down on his chest as he took in the sight of the other students walking in, each one wearing the same expression of quiet determination, their eyes locked on the goal ahead. This was the stage he had been working for all year. But as he walked into the massive auditorium, surrounded by the buzz of anxious energy, Jayden couldn't help but feel small. Hundreds of the brightest math students from across the country were here, each one more capable than the next. The fear of being out of his depth crept in. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a text from Marcus. "You got this. You've earned your place here. Just show them what you can do." A wave of gratitude washed over Jayden. He hadn't realized just how much he valued Marcus's support until now. Marcus had always been his competitor, but now, he was offering him encouragement. Jayden smiled to himself, shoving the phone back into his pocket. When he finally made it to his assigned seat, Jayden took a deep breath and tried to calm the storm of nerves swirling inside him. The room was silent, save for the rustling of papers as other students settled into their spots. He could feel the tension in the air, it was palpable, like the pressure of the moment was settling into his bones. Mr. Becker's words echoed in his mind: "It's not just about the problems you solve, Jayden. It's about the way you handle everything around you, the pressure, the competition, your own doubts." Jayden took another breath, clearing his mind. "I've been through this before," he reminded himself. "This isn't any different. I've faced bigger challenges. I can do this." The exam began. The first few questions were deceptively simple. Jayden flew through them, his mind clicking into gear as he tackled each problem. For a moment, he felt like he was back in his comfort zone, back to the competition that had started it all, the regional contest where he had first found his confidence. But then the questions grew more complex. The problems twisted and turned in ways Jayden hadn't anticipated, forcing him to think on a level he'd never encountered before. The clock ticked relentlessly in the background as his pencil flew across the paper, trying to keep up with the flow of logic and patterns forming in his mind. Each question felt like a puzzle he had to crack, a new challenge to conquer. His mind raced through possibilities and calculations, and yet, with each new problem, the feeling of pressure grew stronger. Minutes became hours. He could feel the eyes of other students on him, some glancing over at his paper, others typing furiously into their calculators. The clock inched closer to the final hour. Jayden's hand was starting to cramp from writing so quickly, but he couldn't afford to slow down. This was the biggest test of his life. About halfway through, Jayden came across a problem that made his stomach flip. It was unlike anything he had prepared for. The equations were complex, involving advanced concepts he had barely touched in his practice sessions. He froze for a moment, trying to process the question, his mind scrambling for answers. What do I do? He glanced around, but there was no one to help him. He had trained for this. He had to trust the work he had put in. He took a deep breath, refocusing, closing his eyes for a moment to push away the panic. He recalled the late nights with Mr. Becker, those moments when he had learned to think through problems methodically, when he had learned that there was always a way forward, no matter how complicated it seemed. He started over. Slowly. Carefully. He worked through the problem step by step, not rushing, even though the pressure of time was mounting. His pencil moved steadily across the paper as he scribbled down his thoughts, refining his process until, finally, the answer clicked. Jayden smiled to himself. He had done it. The doubt that had clouded his mind was gone, replaced by the quiet confidence that had carried him through countless challenges before. As the clock ticked down to the final moments of the exam, Jayden leaned back in his chair, exhausted but content. He had done everything he could. Now, it was up to fate. He looked around at the other students, who seemed just as focused and tired as he was. There was no way of knowing who would emerge on top. But Jaden knew one thing for sure: he had done his best. And that, in itself, was a victory. When the exam ended, Jaden stood up slowly, stretching his stiff legs. He felt a sense of relief, a release of the tension he hadn't even realized he'd been holding in. The room buzzed with quiet chatter as students filed out, but Jaden just walked quietly, letting the exhaustion settle in. As he exited the building, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from his mom. "I know you've worked so hard for this, Jaden. No matter what happens, we are so proud of you. Just remember, you've already won." Jaden smiled softly. His mom had always been his biggest supporter, the one who had helped him stay grounded through every setback and triumph. No matter what the results would be, he realized that this journey had already taught him so much more than any test could. The following evening, after the exam was over, Jaden sat in his room, scrolling through his phone. He had barely eaten, barely rested, his mind still buzzing with the thrill of the day. It was then that he saw the message from Mr. Becker, the one he had been waiting for since he had left the auditorium earlier. "I'm proud of you, Jaden. Regardless of the outcome, you've grown more than I ever imagined. You've proven that you can take on any challenge with confidence and grace. Remember that this journey is just the beginning." Jaden smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude toward his teacher. He had done it. He had pushed himself further than he had ever thought possible. And even though the outcome of the National Math Olympiad wasn't known yet, he already knew one thing: he had come a long way, and no matter what happened next, that was something no one could take away from him. Days passed, and Jaden waited for the results to be posted. The nervousness lingered, but now it was more of a quiet anticipation than the overwhelming pressure he had felt earlier. He had faced the challenge, he had given it his all, and that was enough for him. Finally, the results were announced. Jaden clicked the link, holding his breath as the page loaded. He scanned the list of names, his heart pounding in his chest. There, near the top, was his name. Jaden Taylor, 12th place National Math Olympiad. Jaden blinked, his eyes focusing on the number 12th. He had placed in the top 15. For a moment, a surge of disappointment washed over him. He had hoped for a higher spot. But then, the pride came rushing in. He had made it to nationals, and he had performed well. He had placed among the best in the country. Jaden exhaled slowly, a smile creeping onto his face. He had done it. He had pushed past his doubts, and even if the result wasn't a first-place win, it was a victory in its own right. He had proven that he belonged in this world of high-achieving students, that he could compete with the best. It wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?